This video is brought to you by my new handmade jewelry by Sweet Leaf. "1995 Strange Days is probably one of my favorite sci-fi movies of all time. I originally only ever watched it because TV Guide said there was going to be boobs in it. But then it just wound up being a really good movie that stuck with me ever since I saw it. At first, just because it was entertaining, but the past few years I keep getting reminded of it. Because I keep seeing so much technology cropping up that makes me think, oh yeah, just like in Strange Days. See, one of the main elements in the world of Strange Days, you got these disc recordings of people's memories. You can play back the memory and experience it as if you were them, with all the sights and the sensations and everything. If you had such technology, what would you use it for? Perhaps to experience situations that were too dangerous to try in reality. Perhaps to live out an unrequited love. Or, maybe a little something from that one industry that's always at the forefront of new media. You know the one. The science of getting your rocks off.
Oh my God.
Well, we're still not completely there, at least not as in-depth as the movie, but we're getting pretty close. Today's episode of Tales from the Internet. A Redditor who uses virtual reality to cheat on his wife. With her sister, and he gets caught. And in getting caught, he winds up revealing the sister's terrible secret. Some of you have noticed these big, chunky skull rings that I got sometimes. And I'm stoked to announce that I just partnered with the company that makes them, Sweet Leaf Jewelry. For a limited time, I've got my own rings and pendants. Gonna insert a picture because it doesn't seem to want to focus. Each piece is handmade by Sweet Leaf out of sterling silver. And it's great, you can, wear the rings, wear the pendant to the office. And when someone at work asks you, hey, what's that ring about? You can tell them all about the BME Pain Olympics and 2 Girls 1 Cup and the Jar Guy. Get that good water cooler talk started up. They're only available for a limited time. They're available right now and all the way up until September 1st. So get them while you can. Just go to sweetleafjewelry.com or click the link in my description. Leave it to a Reddit user to pioneer the land of virtual reality cheating. And of course, to have it blow up in his face spectacularly. On May 17th of 2019, an anonymous user on a throwaway account posted, "Today I fucked up. TIFU, I've officially branded myself as the biggest perv, and I 100% deserve it." This incident that he's about to tell us about had only happened an hour prior. And of course, with his whole life on the precipice of collapse, he decides to post about it on Reddit. So here's what happened. He's about to go on vacation with his wife, and they want to get some good footage of the trip. His wife's sister had a sick 360-degree pocket camera, so they ask her to borrow it, and she's like, yeah, sure. But when they get the camera, he discovers that the memory card that she had is still inside it. He checks the memory card and sees that it does in fact still have some video on it. What kind of video? I'm glad you asked. A 1 hour long 360-degree POV-style porn video of herself. Her sister is not a sex worker, so why would she have such a thing? His theory is that because her husband travels a lot for work, she kinda had to go the extra mile to keep things happy on those long trips. So, he just respectfully pretends to have not seen it, goes on with his life, and him and his wife have a lovely vacation. Of course, that's not what fucking happened. See, him and his wife's sister over the past several years have actually had a bit of a complicated relationship. I've had the hots for her for the past 8+ years. Before she got married, and I have, there were several times sexual tensions arose between the two of us. Living together for a year as strictly roommates, movies, dinners, getting drunk while watching movies, just the two of us, breakfasts, etc. A certain trust, or test, was implemented and nothing ever happened between the two of us, as at the time I was dating my now wife, which was working at a distance. But damn it, at the time, if she had just touched my hand once back then, I think I would have lived a whole different life. And suddenly, there it was, right there in his hands. Not just a glimpse into the life that never existed, but a way to step inside of it for just an hour. So he sits on it for a while until he has a day off. That day comes and he sits around waiting for his wife to go out. And he doesn't have to worry about her unexpectedly coming back and getting caught, because you see, they have a system. I have an automated house that lights up the house with geolocation. Before, the app worked with Apple HomeKit, a third-party app needed to be downloaded which tracks your family and friends. Free version only allows you to add one person, so my wife. Wife and I had this app for 3 years now, even if it's useless now after an app update a couple of years back on the original app. We never deleted it since it was so useful for tracking each other using notifications. I get a notification when she's at work, and when I arrive at work, we also both get notifications when one arrives home. Good for times where she does groceries, for example, and I get a notification to prompt me to go out and help her out. Or when I work late and finally leave the office, prompting her to set up the dining table. So he sets up his VR headset, puts his AirPods in, and gets to work. This would have lasted me tops 5 minutes. But the foreplay she does is long and boring. Then the action starts and I go on. So there he is, sitting on his bed spanking the monkey to his wife, sister, and Gloria's VR, living the whole experience in first person as if he was actually up in those sister-in-law guts. And then, with no notification, his wife walks in mid-tug with the goggles still on his face. Are you winning, husband? You see, his wife forgot to charge her phone the night before, so the phone was dead and thus no notifications. He explains that his wife knows he masturbates, but they never had the whole is porn cheating conversation, nor conversations about any of the other possible situations he brings up. Is a sex doll cheating? Is a robot cheating?
Please assume the position.
How about someone stroking you through an electronic sex toy through the power of the internet? In any case, his startled wife rips the goggles off his face and goes, "The fuck?" Then she looks inside the goggles. Is that my sister? She still has her shoes on from coming home and she grabs the VR headset in her bags and storms out. He doesn't see where she went until she gets a chance to charge her phone, and then he sees she's at her parents' house, next door to her sister. So he's fucked. And that's where the post originally ends. Several hours later though, he adds an edit. He mentions that just making the post made him feel a little bit less stressed out, having someone to vent to. But after the post, he's calling his wife, no answer. Then he gets a call from her sister. He didn't pick up though, cause he was scared of what might happen, so she calls him 5 times in a row and eventually just texts him, "Call me." Here's what he does next. I left the apartment and decided to go watch a movie at the theater. Needed to get distracted, which didn't help as I didn't focus once on Detective Pikachu. There's any doubt that this guy was a Redditor. But they're still calling him during the movie and the notifications are getting him distracted. So eventually he just says fuck it and goes back home. And then on the drive back, he gets a notification that his wife is at the house. Not much he can do now. Arrived home, was getting ready for the shitstorm about to happen. That out-of-body experience came back really quickly to reality as I got to the door and then had that fear again. I know she got notification I was back. Of course, both his wife and his sister-in-law are already waiting for him. And remember now, at this point, he doesn't really know if his sister-in-law knows what he did. So he can't apologize or say anything about the situation first. He might unnecessarily incriminate himself. So they're just sitting there in silence until his wife finally says something. I spoke to sister-in-law about what happened. She knows. He starts apologizing to her and the sister goes, "You know this video wasn't meant for you, right?" Gives him a 10-minute talking to that he nods along with. But then this drama comes out that fucked with me. She said that it wasn't for her husband neither. He's been constantly traveling to Bulgaria voluntarily at any chance he could for work, but also through the years he's been having an affair with a colleague there which works at the branch. She knew for a while and let it slide as he was still providing for sister-in-law, but the providing became less and less. Wife knew too about this as she and her sister are so close, but the info was kept within the family to avoid dishonor. This is a big Eastern mentality to have, and it's not the first time family info was kept secret from me. But now they told me because of the circumstance. I was told not to apologize or speak to her husband as he does not know about this video. Sister-in-law is seeing someone else. Her husband and her both live as roommates for now. The divorce word can never go out, but she's found someone long distance and that video was for him. The reason for all the calls was to not mention anything to her husband. Sister-in-law feared that if I did, then this video would have been proof held during divorce process as if she was at fault. So he's freaking the fuck out, but at this point they're also so focused on the sister situation that the topic of him jerking off to the video of her doesn't come up again. That night the sister stays over, they got some food and have a few drinks. Everyone's laughing and having a good time. He describes the sister kicking him under the table every time he makes a joke. He said he felt like having this secret between them all made them feel closer. And then they all sleep in sleeping bags in the living room. He said it's like a camping trip. So, I guess he got away with it. People got a lot to say about this. I think you just wanted to flex on us with those AirPods. It got a bunch of people saying, hey, you should go for a threesome. Which honestly, reading the story, that also crossed my mind. Well, this isn't where the story ends actually. The next day, the post is edited. Everything is deleted and replaced. This is his now ex-wife. Did he not realize, or too dumb to remember, we share everything, including the same Reddit app? I logged on to see this throwaway as the default login account. I've removed all of this personal story for my family's protection and changed this account's password, although it might be too late and already circulated online. Yeah, you could say that it's a little too late and circulated online. I took a look through the comments and was seriously disgusted by most of the responses suggesting to sexually approach both of us last night, which my sister did mention he tried something in the middle of the night. This guy is incredibly living in another world. She then says that she only made this edit to make sure people knew that he did not get away with it. And the actual reason that they had this little living room campout was so that he wouldn't see her packed bags. And before he woke up, they got her shit and dipped. She froze the joint banking account. She deleted the tracking app, and she gave away all his Reddit gold. Also mentioned plans to get a lawyer and get a divorce. TLDR, his life is ruined. This story would go on to earn the fuck up of the month for May of 2019. And although there are certain details to this story that do lend themselves to its credibility, there's one circle that I just cannot square with it. They shared the same Reddit app. Granted, she didn't elaborate on what device was used. Perhaps there was a shared PC that they had where he just simply stayed logged in, but why would you call that an app? Because if she's away and she's looking at Reddit on her phone and sees the account logged in, I don't think it works like that. The only way that I could see that working is if he made the throwaway account using an email that they share and she recovered the password, but she didn't say that she did that. Of course, I've never been in a situation where I was sharing all of my login info with somebody else, so maybe there's just something you do that I don't know about. If I'm wrong and there is something like that, let me know. On November 26th, 2022, an Air India flight departed from New York City headed to New Delhi, India. A pricey non-stop flight that lasts nearly 14 hours on average. It's not the most pleasant experience, but if you gotta make the trip, you gotta do what you gotta do. At least in business class, you can stretch out a bit more and relax. But for the occupant of seat 9A, business class was far from relaxing. In fact, she described the trip as the most traumatic flight she had ever experienced in her 72 years of life. Why, you might ask? See, on this flight, a drunk man pissed on her. But these kinds of incidents are actually surprisingly common. What's less common is that the accused pisser happened to be a Wells Fargo executive. This revelation, of course, leads to a massive scandal that leads to a back and forth that feels like something out of an Oliver Stone movie. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of Air India's P-Gate. So a few weeks ago, I'm on an airplane with my band Jinx. And all of a sudden, my guitar player Jerry, who's sitting in the middle seat, mentions he's got to take a leak, but he doesn't feel like getting up and climbing over everything and squeezing over to the bathroom. Wishes he just, grab one of those back of the seat pouches and piss in the pouch. Of course, eventually he just gets up and goes to the bathroom like a normal person. But it made me think of one of my favorite pictures of all time. This drunk old man just sitting in the seat, pissing into one of those back of the seat pouches. Perfect arc and everything. So I used the in-flight Wi-Fi to look it up, thinking that, this would just be the only thing that pops up. Instead, I find that there are so many airplane pissing incidents. And probably the biggest scandal ever tied to one just happened to be unfolding at that very moment. Although this incident occurred in November, the details weren't publicly known until early January. This was after the 72-year-old woman who had been pissed on wrote a letter to Natarajan Chandrasekaran, the chairman of Air India's parent company, the Tata Group. In the letter, she outlines the events of that plane ride. During the flight, another business class passenger, who at the time's identity was unknown, was becoming increasingly drunk because, how else you gonna pass the time on a 14-hour flight? Lunchtime had just passed and the lights were dimmed. The drunk passenger took this opportunity to walk up to her, unzip his pants, and pee on her. And after peeing, he just stood there until another passenger told him, "Hey, buzz off." So the woman, covered in piss, gets up and tells the crew what had just happened. They provide her with a change of clothes, and then they ask her to return to her piss-covered seat, despite there being a lot of clean seats still available. But she keeps complaining, and the crew understands the situation. So what they do is, they spray the seat with disinfectant, and then ask her to return. Eventually, 2 hours later, they finally give her a new seat. During the flight, the man sobers up, and against her wishes, the crew brings the man to her. He's crying and apologizing profusely, and he tries to negotiate some kind of a deal so she doesn't make a whole case of it. But she's not having it, she just wants him arrested. But then, after the flight lands, he just leaves without any incident. Meanwhile, the old lady was promised a wheelchair so she can get through customs and get right clean as soon as possible. And they do get her the wheelchair, and they take her, and then they leave her in waiting and abandon her for at least a half an hour. It seemed like nothing had been done about this situation, so she wrote the letter. And Air India finally responds that they reported the incident to the police and banned him from flying for 30 days, which was the maximum amount they were allowed to at that point. They had also launched an internal investigation into why the crew was so unhelpful. A few days after the news of this incident broke, the drunk man would be identified by the New Delhi Police Department. He was identified as Shankar Mishra, Wells Fargo's Vice President of Operations in India. After the police got involved, he was pursued with several charges including public obscenity, gestures meant to insult the modesty of a woman, drunken public misconduct, and assault. However, although he was a resident of Mumbai, they could not locate him, and it was believed at that point that he was deliberately evading arrest. Meanwhile, with the news of one of their executives pissing on an old woman, Wells Fargo was forced to release a statement publicly terminating him. Wells Fargo holds employees to the highest standards of professional and personal behavior, and we find these allegations deeply disturbing. This individual has been terminated from Wells Fargo. We are cooperating with law enforcement and ask that any additional inquiries be directed to them. While all this is going on, Mishra, who is still unaccounted for, releases a statement through his attorneys. In the statement, he claims that he made an agreement with a woman to clean her clothes and her soiled items, as well as some financial compensation, and he claimed to have a series of WhatsApp messages that corroborated that this agreement was satisfactory. He also stated that the woman's grievance was with the airline and not with him. But despite this, he mentions that he had faith in the legal system and was willing to comply with law enforcement. The same day, Mishra's father would appear live on India Today. He was questioned about his son's whereabouts, which he didn't really answer, but he also denied that the story had happened at all. He said that his son slept on the flight because he'd been awake for 72 hours, and he also said that his son wouldn't have done this because a 72-year-old woman is like a mother to him. He also said there were no eyewitnesses to this situation. And when questioned about why his son would have apologized if this didn't happen, Shams said that his son had acted under duress and he was merely complying with her demands. Ultimately, the police would trace Mishra's phone, leading them to catch up with him in the city of Bengaluru on January 7th. They then brought him to prison for 14 days while they investigated further. And on the day of his arrest, it turned out that there actually was an eyewitness, a US-based doctor named Sugata Bhattacharjee, who began making the rounds in the media. He spoke to the Times of India about what he saw. Sugata Bhattacharjee, a US-based doctor of audiology and Mishra's co-passenger on the flight on November 26th, told the Times of India that the accused had downed 4 glasses of single malt during lunch. He looked visibly drunk. He asked me thrice, "What do your children do?" I told a male purser to cut off his alcohol supply, Bhattacharjee said. Though the woman was visibly distraught, the cabin crew members persuaded her to talk to the passenger who peed on her. A drunk guy is a drunk guy. When a guy has done such a crime, you do not bring it to the victim and allow him to apologize to her, Bhattacharjee added. Furthermore, Sugata Bhattacharjee said that after urinating on the woman, there was a point when Mishra dozed off. After he woke up and sobered up, he told me, "Bro, I think I'm in trouble." I said, "Yes, you are." The following week's court proceedings would begin. At first, Mishra's attorneys asserted that while he did do what he was accused of, it was not for sexual purposes, which this claim would make him innocent of some of the charges he was accused of. But later, their story would have an interesting change. Now they asserted that Mishra did not pee at all. Instead, they claimed that the 72-year-old woman peed on herself. According to India Today, Mishra's lawyer claimed that the elderly woman urinated on herself owing to her health conditions. His advocate told the court that the woman had been a Bharatanatyam dancer for over 30 years, and it was normal for them to have urinary incontinence. Furthermore, they also suggested that the woman herself might have been drunk. The woman's lawyers responded by calling these claims defamatory, and they said that they basically just made this idea up out of thin air. And furthermore, this claim was a contradiction of claims he had already made in his bail application. And this case would evolve once again after Air India had completed their own internal investigation, concluding that Mishra had in fact done what he was accused of, extending his travel ban to 4 months and suggesting that other airlines follow suit. But their investigation also brought something up that further complicated matters. You see, there was a passenger seated in the same row as this woman. How could it have been possible for Mishra to piss on the 72-year-old woman without disturbing the person in the same row? At the very least, there'd be a little bit of splashback. So the victim was seated in seat 9A. In her complaint, she accused the passenger in seat 8A, the seat in front of her, of being the pisser. Seated in the same row as her in seat 9C was an 85-year-old woman, also a former dancer. It was unclear, however, if there was a passenger seated in 9B between them. If 9B was empty, it might be more likely that Mishra was able to piss on just the one woman. But there's a problem. Upon examining the seating diagram of the airplane, it turns out there is no seat 9B. 9A and 9C are the seats next to each other, with 9A being the window seat and 9C being the aisle seat. So as his lawyers presented it, we're to believe that Mishra walked into the aisle, unzipped his pants, took his wiener out, pissed over an 85-year-old woman who did not notice that she was being pissed over, and got his stream entirely on the 72-year-old woman who had been seated at the window seat. No collateral damage at all. And mind you, this is a man who is said to be extremely drunk. Have you ever seen what a men's bathroom at a bar looks like? That is one magic urine stream. So his lawyers released a statement that in order for him to have pulled this off with his piss, he had to have defied the laws of physics. And a statement from a crew member backs this take up. As published by Op India, the Air India crew member also questioned the silence of the co-passenger, seated next to the alleged victim. Is it even possible for any person to stand in the aisle and pee on the window seat without even a drop on the aisle seat passenger? I myself am over 6 feet tall, but have never been able to stand between the two reclined business class seats. So how could a drunk man manage to do that? Pee on the window seat packs and get out without disturbing the aisle seat packs? Can a man who is so drunk do all this without falling and peeing on himself as well? Is it even possible for any person to stand in the aisle and pee on the window seat without even a drop on the aisle seat packs? Further complicating things with the seating arrangements, Mishra was in fact not the passenger of seat 8A. He was in seat 8C. The true occupant of seat 8A was the other eyewitness, Dr. Sugata Bhattacharjee. And in the same statement by this crew member, he mentions about how Dr. Sugata was kind of a dick. He mentions that at the beginning of the flight, the doctor had tried to use his credentials to get upgraded to first class for free, and he was pissy about it for the rest of the flight. The crew member claims that while the actual incident occurred, Dr. Sugata was asleep. But then all of a sudden, after he wakes up and realizes what's going on, he gets into the situation and becomes a witness. And ultimately what he gets at is that, hey, because this area smells like piss now, I should be upgraded to first class. And with that in mind, it seems like this may have all just been an angle for the doctor to get a free first class seat. Furthermore, Mishra and his lawyers asserted that it seemed like the woman's only actual gripe was that she received a partial refund from the airline. They cited an email written by her son-in-law asking for a full refund. In the email, he says that if these demands were not met, he would go to the media. But Air India still insisted on giving only a partial refund. The growing inconsistencies on both sides left reporters scratching their heads, and in some cases re-examining their initial stances. For example, in a piece by journalist Barkha Dutt, who was initially very outspoken against Mishra, he questions whether or not Mishra was the victim of a media lynch mob. He notes that while at first the details that were known of the case made it seem pretty cut and dry against Mishra, he even managed to track down the mysterious passenger who was seated next to the old woman, the 85-year-old dancer. She said that she was asleep during the entire incident, and only woke up to see that the seat next to her was being cleaned. Nothing had happened to her at all. At the same time, he also notes that it's still strange that Mishra apologized at first and paid for everything, especially since a crew member had mentioned in one of their statements that when it was brought up to him, he had no recollection of it at all. He said that he couldn't imagine himself doing something like that. He also concludes the piece by saying that no matter what actually did happen, the facts of the case that are known show that the airline just mishandled the whole thing one way or another. This is not to say that Air India did not mishandle matters. The pilot, asleep on his rest shift, should have been woken. He should have upgraded the complainant to first class irrespective and informed the International Operations Control Center immediately. The case should have been handed over to the police on arrival for them to determine the truth from the fiction. The management instinct to gag the crew was also a self-goal, but Something has shifted internally as well. The Tatas have backed their pilot against the suspension of his license. As of the recording of this video, the case is yet to be resolved, but it seems to be increasingly likely that the whole thing is just going to get thrown out. What this means for Mishra, who was publicly terminated, remains to be seen. But for now, that's the story of Air India's P-Gate. Before KSI versus Logan Paul. Before Asterios versus War of the Fanboys. There was Uwe Ball versus his critics. And while many people who argue on the internet like to say, "Fight me IRL," it rarely actually comes to fruition. So what was different this time? Find out on this episode of Tales from the Internet. Uwe Boll is considered by many people to be the absolute worst filmmaker of all time. You can see the presence of many of his movies on IMDb's bottom 100 movies of all time. But there's a lot of bad movies out there, and there's a lot of bad filmmakers out there, so what makes Uwe Boll specifically so hated? I think there's a number of factors that we have to consider. Uwe Boll's career actually spans back a lot further than people realize. In 1992, he directed his first feature film entitled German Fried Movie, a clear reference to the 1977 movie Kentucky Fried Movie. And from that time going forward, he pretty consistently put out new movies. But he didn't find himself on most people's radars, and certainly not in his critics' crosshairs, until 2003. That's when he put out House of the Dead, which was his first video game adaptation. And by that point, as I said in my Battletoads video, people had already come to expect any video game movie to be terrible. Yet despite the fact that we had already developed these expectations, for some reason Uwe Boll's work was hit with much more ire than any video game movie director before him. One of the most common criticisms of him was that he would just completely change key elements of the source material. Alone in the Dark goes from being an atmospheric, Lovecraftian horror game to a over-the-top action horror movie. House of the Dead goes from being a game about agents tracking down a mad scientist to a bunch of teens go to a rave gone wrong. But changing things up in a video game adaptation wasn't really anything new. I mean, does this look like a Goomba to you? Check out Agent Doggett's flat top in Double Dragon. And don't even get me started on Resident Evil. I mean, who the fuck was Alice? Like, okay, and I know this is gonna be a controversial opinion, but say what you want about House of the Dead. House of the Dead barely even had a story to begin with, but with Resident Evil, Paul W.S. Anderson took a giant steaming shit on the chest of the game series that's definitely one of my favorites of all time. And then you get these people that are like, oh well, you know, if you forget that it's a Resident Evil movie, it holds up as its own. It fucking doesn't. It sucks. You suck! In my opinion, nothing Uwe Boll ever did was as big of a disgrace as the Resident Evil movies, but you know, God forbid he changes the story that barely even existed of the game that you play when you're a half hour early to the movie theater. What a tragedy. But now, that being said, I have to admit that on a technical level, the Resident Evil movies are a bit more passable. Boll's movies kinda specialized in cringy acting, bad CG, and awkward stylistic choices. But in a world that was becoming increasingly flooded with straight-to-DVD B-movies, I don't think any of these individual elements were really anything special to hate extra on their own. I don't think that Uwe Boll would have ever gained his reputation as the world's worst director if he wasn't doing what he was doing at the time he was doing it. In the early to mid-2000s, internet satire was really starting to mature as a genre, and for the first time ever, you had people making their livings just from being funny on the internet. And one of the most tried and true formulas that was as popular then as it still is today was mocking bad pop culture. You take the rise of this kind of content and combine it with the fact that this side of the internet was heavily entwined with gaming, and you realize that Uwe Boll was the guy making the perfect kind of content for the perfect audience at the perfect time. When I say perfect, I mean perfect to be public enemy number one. So what you wind up with is a lot of people across various websites and forums basically trying to outdo each other for finding the funniest way to describe why Uwe Boll movies suck. And for that matter, why Uwe Boll sucks. And oftentimes, the comedy didn't come so much from explaining the movie, but from rather assessing Uwe Boll as a person. And this was a fact that he was not happy about. If you read the Blood Rain reviews, it is completely ridiculous. 75% of the review is about me as a person and nothing about Blood Rain, he says. I'm not expecting good reviews, but still, in any review there should be at least a few lines of the technical work of the movie. Who's in it, whatever. They can write that they don't like the movies, but this didn't happen. And this was so annoying that I said at some point, look, I want to fight these guys. And this all came to a head in 2006, when he finally issued a press release challenging critics to actually fight him. Uwe is now challenging the critics that fail to watch his films prior to reviewing or commenting to put up or shut up. Towards the end of the filming of Postal, the 5 most outspoken critics will be flown into Vancouver and supplied with hotel rooms. As a guest of Uwe Boll, they will be given the chance to be an extra/stand-in in Postal and have the opportunity to put on boxing gloves and enter a boxing ring to fight Uwe Boll. Each critic will have the opportunity to bring down Uwe in a 10-bout match. There will be 5 matches planned over the last 2 days of the movie. Certain scenes from these boxing matches will become part of the Postal movie. All 5 fights will be televised on the internet and will be covered by international press. This event would be quickly picked up by GoldenPalace.com, an online gambling site, who started promoting the fight as Raging Bull. The majority of people at Uwe Boll wound up the challenge by name were posters from the IMDb message board. However, the 5 spots to fight Uwe Boll would wind up being filled by more prominent internet critics. Lotex, the creator of SomethingAwful.com. Prior to the challenge, he had actually not seen any of Uwe Boll's movies, but after he heard about it, he had this to say. Alone in the Dark. A movie by a stupid German jerk who is stupid and smells and probably molests dead children. Although if that last part is considered slander and or libel in Canada, then just disregard and pretend it actually said he molests living children instead. Another challenger was Jeff Snyder of Ain't It Cool News. Like Lotex, he had also previously never actually watched an Uwe Boll movie.
Now, I had never even seen an Uwe Boll movie, but Ain't It Cool had really given this guy his reputation as the world's worst filmmaker.
The next challenger, Chris Alexander of Rue Morgue, was more familiar with Uwe Boll's work.
His movies are bad, they're terrible, they're awful, they're hypnotically bad, but they're so bad on such a gigantic, huge operatic scale.
And then there's Chance Minter, who wasn't a critic, he was an amateur boxer who was just looking for his next fight. Boll's 4th opponent is Chance Minter, a 17-year-old cinephile from Frederick, Maryland. Before the fight, Minter got pumped up by listening to the theme song from Conan the Barbarian on his iPod. Boll's really wild, more of a brawler than a fighter, he says. His jab is weak. He tries to get close so he can swing wide. I'm just gonna go out there and do my thing. Although when asked, he wasn't much of a fan of Uwe Boll's work either.
Most of his movies suck.
There was also a Spanish fighter, Carlos Palencia Jimenez Arguello, who didn't make it to the Raging Bull event but did wind up fighting Uwe Boll in Spain. He lost. And when the day of the official Raging Bull event came around, Lotex, Chris Alexander, Chase Minter, and Jeff Snyder also lost. But there is a little bit of fuckery in this situation. At least, according to Lotex, things weren't as they expected.
To all my fans, I would have to say, if an angry German man challenges you to a boxing match and you've had absolutely no training, and then he says, okay, well yeah, I'll train you before, and then he doesn't, and then he says, well, it doesn't matter, I'm not going to hit you really hard, and then he does, you have a good reason to hate him a lot.
And when you see how these guys are really hamming it up before getting their faces punched in, there might be something to what Lotex is saying. There is also a rumor that Uwe Boll didn't actually box Chase Minter, the amateur boxer. And apparently there was some controversy from Golden Palace. They were concerned about the legalities of Uwe Boll beating up a 17-year-old. But I think this rumor stems from people misunderstanding something Lotex said.
And the 4th guy, when they said, and a real amateur boxer is going to be fighting him. The guy never even fought a fight. Yes, he's an amateur boxer because he's sparred before, but he's never fought.
I think a lot of people misinterpreted this as him saying that Uwe Boll didn't box Chase Minter, when really he's saying that the kid's qualifications were overstated. And interestingly, after the event, Chase Minter would go on to work backstage on some of Uwe Boll's productions later on. And Chance wasn't the only one of the competitors to have his view of Uwe Boll changed after the fight. Here's how Chris Alexander described the day after the fight. The next day, bruised and beaten but exhilarated, I was picked up by Ball in his SUV, driven to his beach house with his lovely dogs Daisy and Lara in tow, and grilled on why I was so adamantly believed his genre films were so bloody awful. The man genuinely wanted to know. With a slew of upcoming horror and fantasy films on his slate, including the Lord of the Rings ripoff In the Name of the King with Ray Liotta and Burt Reynolds, he said he wanted to understand why people prejudge his work and why he doesn't get a fair critical shake. I had to tell him, Ball's movies are bloated, expensive, and incoherent attempts at aping American genre pictures and sport some of the most boneheaded casting choices in filmdom. But I left Vancouver with the impression of him as a delightfully insane, two-fisted rogue and a shockingly honest one at that. Someone who absolutely adores film, knows its history, and truly lives for what he does. Hell, he even had me pondering my role as a film critic. Whether I was someone who casually dismisses others' life work while wishing it was me making movies. Yes, House of the Dead is still inexcusably dreadful, and sure, Alone in the Dark still sucks, harder than a Hoover. But the man behind those subpar pics is a true original. He didn't just pout about bad reviews, he took matters into his hard, punishing hands. And that deserves respect. It's just unfortunate that it took a public display of merciless skull battering to make me see this rather profound truth. And for what it's worth, I think there's one thing that Uwe Boll does not get enough credit for. I think it's been a trend over the past few years, honestly maybe the past couple decades even, to enjoy horror movies that are so bad that they're good. Yet so many of them, they can't help but act self-aware. They want to wink to us and let us know that they're in on the joke. And I think the real masters of the so bad that it's good movie, people like H.G. Lewis or Tommy Wiseau, they didn't go out trying to make a bad movie. They just wanted to make whatever movie it was possible for them to be able to make. And I think Uwe Boll has a lot in common with them in that regard. Also, I think Rampage was just a legitimately good movie. But for better or for worse, Uwe Boll is now retired from filmmaking.
Basically, my message is, fuck yourself.
These days, he's actually a restaurateur, and apparently a damn good one at that. His restaurant Bauhaus wound up being named one of the top 100 restaurants in all of Canada. It also made a list published by the world's 50 best restaurants. So, the next time you're sitting around casually watching House of the Dead, as people do, think of the Wiener Schnitzel.
Like many of Sega's console endeavors, the Dreamcast was a system well ahead of its time. It was the first console released of the 6th-gen systems, beating PlayStation 2 and GameCube to market by years. It introduced the world to legendary titles like Shenmue, Jet Set Radio, Resident Evil Code Veronica, Seaman, among others. And perhaps most importantly, it was the first home console that was internet ready right out of the box. A ton was put into promoting its online play, such as a campaign with Limp Bizkit, including ads telling you to look out for Fred Durst, who, according to crazy-ass moments in nu metal history, was said to be really good at Quake 3. Also, Fred Durst autographed Dreamcast and go for a decent amount of money. It's such an amazing console. Doesn't it get you excited? Maybe a little too excited? Well, it definitely did for one boy in Brazil. So for this episode of Tales from the Internet, let's talk about what I'm told is one of the most legendary internet stories to come out of Brazil. The boy who nutted it inside of his brand new Sega Dreamcast. Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, we're going back to Brazil. I think there's a tendency on the English-speaking side of the internet to just think of it as the whole internet and all of its famous stories like Swamps of Dagobah, Vagina Bacon, Hello My Future Girlfriend. But for every language there's internet stories that are just as infamous as any of those that we rarely if ever get to hear about. So my curiosity was piqued when a Brazilian viewer, Gustavo Costa, told me the story of the Brazilian Cum Dreamcast. Supposedly one of the Brazilian internet's most infamous stories. And when I spoke about this on stream, a number of Brazilian viewers corroborated that yeah, everyone knows this story. So here we go, the story of a boy from Brazil named Leonam. And note that I have two different translations of the story that I'm working with here. They're different from each other in ways that are very subtle, but in some cases kind of important. I'm piecing it together to the best of my ability, but if I get something wrong with it, definitely let me know. This was originally posted in 2004 to forumsbr.hypermart.net. The original posts aren't on the Internet Archive, unfortunately, however, they've all been compiled together in a text document. The collection of posts begins with a disclaimer. Attention, this message has a little adult content. It is not recommended for females, avert your eyes ladies, or boys under the age of 11 who are likely does not have the knowledge required to understand the subject of the text. What's great about that is the boy in the story is 13, so it's like, yo, us 13-year-olds, we're grown enough to talk about these kinds of things. You 11-year-olds, though, you're gonna have to wait till you're grown-ups like us 13-year-olds. It's the funniest text of my life. The worst thing is that Leonan is real, really. You'll see. The 13-year-old boy, Leonan, had received a Sega Dreamcast for his birthday. This was not even a month prior, and as he had said, he had done everything possible to get his parents to buy this for him. Then one day, he's playing a pirated version of Crazy Taxi. Finishes up, takes out Crazy Taxi, so he can replace it with the boot CD you need to play pirated games. But with the lid still open, suddenly everyone else goes out. He has the home all to himself, and so he gets an idea. Now's his chance. He's gonna go look at some naked ladies on the computer and rub one out. So he's standing in front of his computer looking at a website that he found on these very forums. He's doing his thing and he gets to the point where he can no longer contain himself. He doesn't want to get anything on his monitor or his keyboard though that are right in front of him, so he quickly turns to the left. Unfortunately for Leonan, what is to the left of him is his still open Sega Dreamcast, which he promptly nuts inside of. At this point, he doesn't know whether to laugh or cry. He cleans it up to the best of his ability, but that dry residue is just too much for that poor laser lens. That shit's not working anymore. So cry it is. Desperate for solutions, Leonan goes to the forum to see if anyone has any ideas about what he can do.
My mother is going to kill me when she finds out that paid 750 reals and I already broke it. It is on warranty, but how will I tell the men on the store? How will I clean the lens now? Help me please. I will never masturbate again in my life.
Unfortunately, since the original thread isn't archived, we can't see people's responses. I imagine it was mostly just people laughing their asses off at him though. The next day, Leonan makes another thread. He rushes back home to check up on his Dreamcast. However, as soon as he gets through that door, his mother's already waiting for him with the Dreamcast on the couch, looking like what he describes as a general. She looks like she wants to kill him. He's sweating bullets at this point, and the first thing she says, "Leonan, what did you drop in this video game?" He asks her why, and she mentions that she brought it to the store, and when the guy opened it up, there was a white area of something. Something was spilled in there, which is not covered by the warranty, so he was shit out of luck. And the mother wanted explanations for why the expensive system they had just gotten him for his birthday is already broken. And she also wanted explanations for why it smells like cheese. Actually, knowing what the mother didn't know, I also want explanations for why it smells like cheese. Like, what the fuck are they feeding this kid? His legs are shaking and he doesn't have any answers for her, so he runs back to his room and locks himself in. And from his room, he calls up Tectoy. Tectoy being the company that distributes Sega consoles in Brazil, even having some Brazil-exclusive releases like a wide variety of special master systems. Leonan begins by assuring the Tectoy representative that this is not a prank call, and he proceeds to tell him about how he nutted it inside of his Dreamcast. Of course, the Tectoy representative dies laughing, and when he finally catches his breath, he tells him to not try to clean the lens himself, but to just take it back to the store. Which, of course, as we've learned, is not really an option, so Leonan is fucked. Also, he thinks at this point his parents figured out what really happened. His reason for this being that he's sure his mother knows what cum smells like, because on Tuesdays and Thursdays every week, his parents bone all night. At this point, he's also considering just admitting the truth to his father, and he also laments that he didn't have a younger brother to blame this on. He finishes by asking if maybe he should try to clean the lens with alcohol or water or anything else they suggest. There are a few suggestions and a little bit of ribbing, which takes us to the third post. He begins by thanking two forum users, Eric and Francisco, for helping him, then goes on to make a confession.
Okay, as you are being nice with me, I got to confess something. I broke my promise. It is stronger than me. I did one when I was locked in my room. Sorry. This time I aimed right and I didn't hit anything.
He also mentions that the Tectoy guy suggested try and use one of those disc cleaner things. If you're unfamiliar, they're those discs that have those little brushes on them. When you run the console, it brushes away the dust and whatever particles. I've never found them to be particularly useful, and you're probably not surprised to hear that this did not clean up the dried cum. He also addresses a forum user named Lestat. Lestat mocked his poor jizz control and acted this was his first time. Leonin responded that this was not his first time, in fact it was his 5th time. He also addresses people who are asking if they can come to his neighborhood and see if they can take a look at it. Which, thankfully, he realized that this was a really bad idea, so he's not doing that. He was also worried about some guy who is making a website documenting the whole thing. He also makes a reference that I'm not quite sure about.
I told my colleagues what is happening to me, and my class has even given me the nickname Gonzaguinha. You know why? That accordionist.
So I'm not familiar with Gonzaguinha, so I looked him up. And it turns out he died suddenly and tragically after being hit by a truck. Which, you know, might be applicable to the impending dread of this situation. But Gonzaguinha wasn't known for playing accordion, his father Luis Gonzaga was. I'm not sure if he got the guys mixed up or what. Because maybe the joke wasn't about the sudden death, but rather how it looks to play the accordion, although I don't know who, like, jerks off like they're playing an accordion. Ultimately, now he's looking for help not just with the Dreamcast, but how to deal with his parents.
I have to delete my computer's history because she checks everything. So it's thought if she enters this site, discovers everything. What a shame, and what a shit that I'm going to take. You may even think I'm childish, but I'm only 13 years old. I'm figuring things out now. It is by making mistakes that you learn. Do you think I was going to do this soon on my Dreamcast? Help is just what I need.
Then we get to the 4th and final post.
Guys, finally my terror came to an end. Thank God. I didn't get caught, but it was much worse, I swear.
Believing that his parents would eventually figure out what really happened, he takes his father aside.
I said, Dad, for the love of God, you swear if I tell you something you won't say to anybody. He said okay. I believed. So I closed my eyes and told him it was me who broke the video game. But it wasn't on purpose, I cummed on it. He laughed. Laughed till he cried. Then I said, I didn't mean it to happen. I'm really embarrassed right now, but that's how it happened.
His father scolded him a bit for visiting porn sites, but then he told him he had a way to fix everything. And then finally, after this going on for days, Leon could finally breathe a sigh of relief. He's sitting on bed, playing his Game Boy, then his mother walks in. Big smile on her face with his father in hand. And she says, Leo, me and your father have something we have to talk to you about.
You are turning into a grown boy. My ears started to get red. You are not a little kid anymore. Your body will have changes, your voice will change. You are turning into a little teen. They didn't already told me the same thing on school. My mother said, when you want to do that, go to the bath so you won't get things dirty, and after you've done it, wash your hands so you won't get things dirty with it. Can imagine how I am right now.
But it doesn't end there. She calls all 6 of his aunts to let them know that their little boy is all grown up and jerking it. She also tells his grandmother, as well as the girl who works at the house who he notes is hot. Afterwards, he gets a phone call from his grandmother telling him that he has no morals and he has to stop this immediately or he's gonna burn in hell. And he notes that his family likes to gossip a lot, so by now all of his cousins definitely know, so he's not looking forward to seeing them again. Ultimately, his father takes the Dreamcast to the store to get repaired. They're charging 450 reals for just the lens. That's without labor costs. So for that price, Leonin considers just simply importing a Japanese Dreamcast. He says that's probably better anyway. Leonin, who is now traumatized by masturbation forever, leaves with these words of wisdom.
To all people on this forum who tried to help me, thank you. Do not masturbate close to video games. May break. This had to be in the manual of the device. Thanks, friends.
That's the story of the Brazilian cum Dreamcast. The level of access that fans have to celebrities has never been greater. It used to be that maybe you had an address to send a fan letter to, and maybe you would get a generic letter back and a glossy photo. But if you wanted to get any kind of peek behind the curtain, you had to wait for him to go on The Late Show to shill their latest project. It was a situation that worked really nicely for Hollywood types back in the day, but we don't live in that world anymore. Today, you can instantly irritate your favorite celebrities at the push of a button. But this is only a relatively recent development, and it didn't come without some growing pains, and perhaps one of the greatest moments in that evolution was the ill-fated Woody Harrelson Reddit AMA. The day that Redditors were given a chance to ask Woody Harrelson anything, and boy did they ask him anything, and boy did he not answer any of it. So for today's episode of Tales from the Internet, can we please keep this about Rampart?
These days, the Reddit AMA is a standard stop on any celebrity's promotional tour. It's as commonplace as going on a late-night TV show or the morning news. All different kinds of people have done AMAs at this point. Actors, musicians, scientists, even Obama did an AMA. But the thing about AMAs is that they can vary a lot in quality. Sometimes you'll have people who want a more curated experience, so a Reddit representative will just give them what they believe to be the best questions, and they'll answer them sometimes in a video. But really, AMAs are at their best when the person is really there on Reddit answering the questions in the moment, and answering any questions, even the hard ones. And that kind of AMA is the exact opposite of the notorious Woody Harrelson AMA. It all starts with a movie called Rampart. Rampart was a police drama with a star-studded cast including people like Woody Harrelson, Ice Cube, Steve Buscemi, and more. And if you were to go right now on Google and look up Rampart, you would see that some of the suggestions include Rampart Reddit AMA and Rampart Woody Harrelson AMA. But Woody Harrelson didn't actually have the first AMA about Rampart. It was on January 10th of 2012 that Oren Moverman, the writer and director of Rampart, stopped by Reddit to talk about his upcoming movie. Hello Reddit, I am Oren Moverman and I'm in LA getting ready to release my new film Rampart, which opens in theaters on February 10th with Woody Harrelson and many other faces you'll recognize. I've got someone manning the keyboard throughout the day and will be back to answer questions at 12 EST and then again later in the afternoon. AMA. And Oren's AMA went really well. They asked him all kinds of different questions on a number of topics, questions about his creative process, advice for getting into the industry, what it was like to work with Woody Harrelson. There were very few questions that were actually about Rampart itself, which is fine for an AMA because the point of an AMA isn't to really blindly shill something to an audience. It's about actually connecting with the audience and building a relationship with them. It's about interacting with the audience. You know, something that you can do on Reddit that you can't do on TV. And it's clear that Oren understood this, but if you scroll to the top of the thread, you'll see comments indicating that someone else didn't quite get it. Have you considered talking to Woody about how to do an IMA? Are you aware that he is totally obsessed with you and that you are pretty much the only person he ever talks about? Has Woody lost his mind? You might want to do some damage control. You seem like a pretty normal, down-to-earth guy, but Woody or his PR bimbo really screwed the pooch on this one. Might have cost you a lot of money due to lost fans. Woody Harrelson's legendary Reddit AMA would take place a month after Oren's, in February, a week before the movie came out. Hi Reddit, it's Woody here. I'm in New York today doing interviews for my new film Rampart, which opens in theaters on February 10th. I'll be checking in from 3 to 4 EST today and we'll get to as many of your questions as I can, so start asking now. Be back soon. And in all fairness to Woody, the deck was stacked against him from the start, and the reason I say that is because very quickly, this became the top voted question. I swear this is allegedly a true story. I went to a high school in LA and you allegedly crashed our prom after party, Universal Hilton. You allegedly ended up taking the virginity of a girl named Roseanne. You allegedly didn't call her afterwards. She allegedly cried a lot. Do you remember any of this and confirm, or have you allegedly been so knee-deep in Hollywood pootie for so long that this qualifies as a mere blip? And even before Woody got a chance to answer a single question, people kinda had a sense that this wasn't gonna go so good. Woody is like, fuck, what have I gotten myself into? Welcome to Reddit, buddy. He got himself into Rosanna. What the fuck, did you think she and Woody fucking Harrelson were gonna start dating? Full credit to Woody Harrelson though, this was the first, and one of the very few questions that he actually answered. First of off, it's not true, and second off, I don't want to answer questions about that. Let's focus on the film, people. And a user named Jota quickly instructed Woody on a Reddit AMA is supposed to be. You said AMA. That means ask me anything, not ask me anything with regards to this movie I'm pushing. But it's understandable that Woody Harrelson would want to shift the conversation away from uncomfortable allegations about his personal life and back onto the movie he came to talk about. But it was that first response that would plant the seed that would become fully fertilized by the next response. The reason I love seeing you in movies is that you always seem so natural, well-adjusted, and in character no matter the role. What has been your most difficult role to prepare for and why? This character in Rampart was the most difficult. I have a hard time seeing myself as a cop, being slightly anti-authoritarian, so I really had to immerse myself in that mentality. It was a challenge, but it was one I was psyched to meet, especially working with Oren Moverman. So you were more comfortable playing a serial killer and natural-born killers. No, he just isn't promoting natural-born killers right now. More questions were asked, but with similar responses. Out of all the roles you played, which has been the most rewarding, most difficult, and most fun? And if you are willing to answer, what's the one role you wish you didn't take? Can I say Rampart? It really took over my life for a while. I wouldn't say fun is the operative word. Well, there was a lot of... The great thing about working with Oren is, he gives you an incredible playground, and all the tools, great direction, wonderful words to say, and inside of that he says, go play. Working with Oren, he's adaptable. If he finds this is working, he commands you, tells you to keep going. He's always pushing the outer limits. As for the other roles, well, if they don't specifically come up in conversation, I don't give them much thought. Another person asked him about whether or not acting takes over his life, which of course he managed to circle around back to his character in Rampart. I will tell you, it can really take over your life for a while. As I said, with my family, it's a strong bond, so that helps, but I relate to a character and his love of his family. For example, I have 3 daughters. Dave Brown has 2. That pain he was feeling when things are not going so well. That I can really sink my teeth into that. Sink my emotionality there. Who the fuck asked you about your family? Who's Dave Brown? What the fuck are you talking about? You need an adult? And in a question about improvisation, Rampart, what was your most memorable or favorite line that you improvised during a film shoot that the director kept in the movie? Yeah, all of them? With films with Oren specifically, you don't do any rehearsal ahead of time. You aren't blocked out. You don't do blocking. You know, we try to come into the scene prepared and hope the other actors are prepared, and in this case they always were, especially Bree, who initially that part was much smaller just by virtue of her. The power of her personality and her abilities, she made that part a lot richer. At this point, it became crystal clear that Woody Harrelson had absolutely no intention of engaging the Reddit audience in an authentic conversation, but instead circling every single answer back to the movie he was promoting. And Reddit wasn't fucking having it. This isn't The Tonight Show and I'm not buying your bullshit. It was too bad you couldn't just open up to your fans with honest answers instead of peddling your latest movie. Oh well, I'll just assume some clueless PR person convinced you to do this, assuming this is even you. Moving on. Next time, don't have your publicist sit beside you feeding you crap. Your fans would have thoroughly enjoyed an hour or 2 out of your day to honestly answer questions. You do realize a missed opportunity here, where the buzz you generated would have caused people to go see Rampart even if you didn't say a word about Rampart, right? By the way, I've watched White Men Can't Jump about 100 times, and I'm jealous that you've probably seen Rosie Perez's boobies. Perhaps realizing what he's gotten himself into, Woody Harrelson finally started to answer questions about things besides the movie. But he was only giving very brief, uncaring, flippant answers, and this only further angered the mob. What do you do in your free time? Hobbies, etc.? Favorite places to travel and explore? In my free time, I'm mainly with my family. That's a pretty strong bond. You are an absolute badass, but more importantly, what movie was the most fun for you to work on? Are you happy with the reception Zombieland received? Yeah, I wouldn't say fun. Intense, challenging, engaging, yeah. So you don't actually enjoy acting? It kept on getting worse, but eventually there was a small glimmer of hope. He did manage to give one genuine, thought-out answer that had nothing to do with Rampart. It was a question about Woody Harrelson's veganism because, of course, no matter how much they don't want to be there, no matter how much they don't care, no matter how much they want to promote Rampart, if you ask a vegan about vegan shit, they're gonna tell you about vegan shit. How long have you been a vegan? What got you into it? Principles or health reasons? I read that in Kingpin they made you special veggie burgers to eat during the diner scene. Huge fan. Initially, it was an energetic pursuit, but eventually I did develop a deep compassion for animals. I'd eat a burger and want to go to sleep. I started for energy and it has served me well. Upvote for answering a question not about Rampart. And that answer got more than 1,000 upvotes. Maybe Woody could salvage this thing after all. Or maybe not. Any glimmer of hope was completely demolished by this next response. Should change this AMA to AMAAR. Ask me anything about Ramparts. We gotta be. I consider my time valuable. And it may have very well been that line that solidified this as the crappest AMA in the history of the internet. Woody Harrelson's time is valuable. It's with that line that he shat on his colleagues, other actors, musicians, Nobel Prize winners, a sitting president of the United States. And finally, Jedberg, a Reddit administrator, asked the question that was probably on everybody else's mind. Did you know about Reddit before today? I know Oren Moverman did an interview here. I did just learn about it, so I'm trying. And that response almost kinda makes you feel bad for Woody Harrelson. Like, he didn't set out to be a dickhead or anything. He's just being a boomer who doesn't understand the internet. He was trying to apply a 90s mentality to a 2012 world where even then, Reddit AMAs weren't as polished as they would eventually become. But regardless of Woody Harrelson's innocent boomerness, the legend of this thread would live forever. His AMA was such an abject failure that it would go on to increase the status of Reddit AMAs as a whole, being covered in several mainstream publications, and probably serving as a cautionary tale where publicists would tell their clients, don't do what Woody Harrelson did. Can we stick to talking about Rampart was a line that was repeated in basically every AMA for several months. And the beautifully 2012 unironic top text, bottom text, scumbag Woody Harrelson meme format made the rounds. And if you go on Urban Dictionary, you'll see Rampart defined as to have sex and never call that person again, especially if she's a high school girl. Woody ramparted Roseanne after our prom party. But how did the movie actually do? I mean, the trailer was bombarded with dislikes after it was released, and people on Reddit were calling for a boycott, which honestly is a bit much just for an interview gone bad, but did it have an impact? In terms of the critical reception, we can see that on Rotten Tomatoes, there's a 74% critic score versus a 35% audience score. If I had to guess, I would assume that the very low audience score had at least a little bit to do with backlash from the AMA, so we can probably assume that it was a decent enough movie. Commercially, though, the movie was an absolute flop. It grossed about $1.5 million with a budget of about $12 million. And while some might say that maybe the Reddit AMA had to do with the poor performance, I think it's actually the opposite. If anything, I'm sure there's some people who checked that movie out just out of morbid curiosity. They went to the theater for the meme of it. Regardless of whether or not Rampart was a good movie though, I think it's safe to say that the Reddit AMA had a much bigger, longer lasting cultural footprint, serving as a lesson taught to the dinosaurs of the old media. But anyway, that's the end of Woody Harrelson's disastrous Reddit story. When Silent Hill first came out, I think a lot of people expected it to be some kind of cheap imitation of Resident Evil. Those games being as successful as they were, I think it became pretty clear that survival horror was here to stay. But while most of the imitators are largely forgotten about, Silent Hill, despite, Konami doing Konami things, maintained a legacy that's lasted nearly 20 years. What made Silent Hill so different was that it took a vaguer, more supernatural and atmospheric approach to horror. It left a lot to the imagination, and this vagueness led to a lot of discussion and fan theories, and not just, the lame kinds of fan theories you usually hear for everything about how all the main characters are really dead, or, every character is secretly Jesus. Those kinds of theories for Silent Hill do exist, but they exist for basically everything. Meanwhile, Silent Hill is also host to a lot more complex theories. Like the idea that Silent Hill is the nexus point for a bunch of different parallel dimensions. Or that Pyramid Head is actually the good guy. Or how about the theory that Walter Sullivan, the main antagonist from Silent Hill 4, who first was mentioned in Silent Hill 2 as a serial killer, fell into his villainous ways because, as a child, he was circumcised. Now, the circumcision theory, first posited by the Silent Hill wiki, is not one of the more widely accepted theories about the game, but it is certainly the most infamous. Find out why on this episode of Tales from the Internet. This episode is sponsored by my own damn merch store, where I've got a brand new design up where I've got tentacles. It's cool, buy it.
Oscar Mayer wieners are all meat.
I'm gonna be honest, I kinda hate fan theories. Most video game fan theories are usually just these massive reaches that it sounds like something that came from people who had their brains ruined by high school English class. They're usually pretty ridiculous, but every once in a while you'll come across a theory that's just so outlandish that you just gotta take a step back and appreciate it. Enter the Silent Hill circumcision theory. It was first posited on the Silent Hill wiki in December of 2015 by a user named Alex Shepard. Possible circumcision victim. Judging by a visit in St. Jerome's Hospital, it is also possible Walter had his genitals, in parentheses penis, mutilated as a baby via circumcision, also known as male genital mutilation. There are some who theorize and compare circumcision to a dark, ancient, satanic/occult mutilation blood flesh ritual, as well as being connected to the Illuminati, which could have led to Walter's psyche becoming influenced by the occult of the order. And when boys become circumcised, it acts a covenant to the dark forces on the planet and enters a pact with Satan. They also believe it is disguised as a necessary medical practice, and some doctors are satanic/Illuminati puppets. Others believe that circumcision can harm the bond between mother and son, and a man's ability to love and bond with a woman. Circumcision can have an extreme influence on the psyche and have negative effects on the development of the human psyche because a baby's brain is extremely affectable, vulnerable, and susceptible to pain. Circumcision can scar a baby for life into adulthood and harm the healthy development of male sexuality. Circumcision can cause permanent brain damage, permanent psychological damage, psychological/brain rewiring, mental illness leading to depression and suicide, trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, long-term aggravated response to pain. It was once thought that male genital mutilation would have beneficial properties by early 20th century doctors. Beginning the 21st century, circumcision, when performed for unnecessary non-medical reasons, is now regarded by some as a form of child abuse and a violation of human rights. As a result, circumcision is now a controversial and serious issue, with some believing that their government should be more supportive of victims of involuntary male genital mutilation, whether through more recognition or through monetary compensation. You know, on second thought, maybe I will take my circumcision reparations. The article, once again about Walter Sullivan from the video game Silent Hill, goes on to editorialize a bit about circumcision in America. Somehow, through an insane amount of sheer ignorance, stupidity, lack of common sense, and decades of Americans being severely brainwashed, circumcision was carried over to the 20th and early 21st century North America. It took North Americans hundreds of years to realize that mutilating babies' genitals without their consent wasn't such a good idea after all. Then again, it also took Americans time to stop killing Native Americans, witch burning, discriminating non-Christians, the non-religious and non-believers, slavery, racism and lynching, female oppression, and LGBT oppression. So issues like male genital mutilation, animal holocaust genocide in slaughterhouses, mass fluoridation of drinking water, trigger-happy police brutality, wage slavery, and wealth inequality would also take time. Remember, once again, that this is a wiki article about a character from Silent Hill 4, a game that contains absolutely no overt references to circumcision. It's just a theory. But yeah, I don't think MatPat's touching this one with an uncut 10-foot pole. But in the absence of any overt references to circumcision, the author of the edits provided these examples of possible circumcision symbolism. Many things in the Nightmare Hospital could be interpreted as horrific and traumatic circumcision metaphors and symbols, and a result of a barbaric, torturous, and inhumane procedure which should be banned and illegal worldwide. Bloody forceps on a stretcher. Possible phallic/penis symbolism. Possible anesthesia symbolism, syringes, needles, and bills and meat, and bloody rags. Possible foreskin symbolism. That is a big-ass foreskin. Jesus Christ. It's basically the same size as Henry, a figure restrained, much like how babies must be restrained. There is also a possibility that the greedy worm monster has phallic symbolism and may be symbolic of a circumcised mutilated penis. The greedy worm monster appears throughout many of the worlds in the game, and it may be symbolic of a monstrous circumcised mutilated penis searching for its missing foreskin, and the despair and horror of never being able to find and retrieve it. In other words, a man who feels violated and incomplete. So essentially, this guy thinks that this game, which once again has no overt references to foreskin, has an entire monster dedicated to this quest. It's like, give me back my foreskin. It's like that guy from Crip Show that's like, I want my cake, but his cake is his foreskin. In fact, now that I think about that, that might actually improve the game. And at this point, it's worth noting that the article with these edits contains more text editorializing about circumcision than it does about Walter's actual activities in the game. So obviously, other people did not share Alex Shepard's foreskin fixation, and they got into a little bit of an edit war on the wiki. You can't delete something because you don't like the truth. This has nothing to do with Silent Hill? Yes, it does. You are blatantly removing the effects of circumcision on the psyche, which is a core aspect of personality, and the fact that there is no compensation for circumcision victims / survivors is an injustice, and that's what Silent Hill is. More weird and unnecessary political commentary that isn't related to the character. Because people need understanding of Walter's circumstances. Seriously, stop trying to remove history. And at the same time, there is also a war being waged on the talk page. Edits RE male genital mutilation. I don't quite remember the game being a lunatic anti-male genital mutilation rant, so I figured the article should probably be the same way and removed such. Even if that section is found to be worth keeping, if reinstated, it should probably do more than pay lip service to Sullivan's mental state rather than being some unhinged polemic. You're a fucking horrible human being for advocating genital mutilation, and 99% of Americans who advocate mutilating penises are fucking brainwashed morons. Circumcision can have a huge effect and huge influence on the development of a human being's psyche. It's the truth. What you are trying to do is erase American history and hide the truth. Seriously, don't be on the wrong side of history. It's like trying to delete the Holocaust article on Wikipedia saying it's some anti-Holocaust or anti-Nazi rant. That's how brainwashed you sound. Nobody is advocating genital mutilation. I'm against circumcision myself, but a lot of that section is entirely irrelevant to Silent Hill. After describing the evidence that shows Walter might have been circumcised, there's no need to include completely irrelevant information about how barbaric American doctors were. That's stuff belonging on websites dedicated to that topic, not a Silent Hill wiki. You are so deluded. Silent Hill is all about exposing the atrocities of America. That's the entire purpose of it. It is a fact and truth that circumcision damages the male psyche and is part of a brainwashing dark ritual. And no, I won't remove it. Forced circumcision should be banned, and the American government, or Illuminati at this rate, should actually acknowledge it because it's an injustice to Americans. It also helps give backstory and understanding of male genital mutilation in America. People need to wake the fuck up and realize what's happening to humanity. Things came to a head on December 15th when the issue was brought to the wiki's forum. Circumcision. What's with the America-bashing tirade against circumcision? Not exactly appropriate for a character profile. And now, a lot of the posts that were a part of the thread have since been deleting, but a lengthy response from Alex Shepard remains at the top. I already explained myself. Everyone should be anti-genital mutilation. The wiki article is unbiased and factual, and if you can't see why, you are completely brainwashed. And even if the wiki article is biased towards not mutilating children's genitals, good. 1. Male genital mutilation is a huge and serious human rights issue. It's not as simple as snip snip. If you believe that, you are brainwashed and desensitized. You are mutilating a baby's body. It is sick and barbaric child abuse and torture. If you support mutilating babies' genitals for unnecessary reasons, or ambivalent to it, you are brainwashed and a horrible human being. 2. Male genital mutilation can have a huge influence on the development of the human psyche, and if you believe otherwise, you are brainwashed. Studies have proven mental illness is linked to trauma as a baby. The fact alone is extremely noteworthy and can pave the way for the development of personality, which is why it should be listed near the top of Walter's article. It is heavily implied Walter had his penis mutilated as a baby. Almost everything in Silent Hill is symbolic, and the fact that you can find human skin, anesthesia in the skin, bloody forceps, restrained child/baby figures, etc. is likely not a coincidence. Not to mention, Walter was an American back in the 1960s, when the vile practice was extremely popular and at its heyday. Even then, the article does not say Walter had his genitals mutilated as a fact. It only suggests a possibility. This is the way this wikia has been. Possibilities and speculation are allowed as long as there is sufficient evidence for it. Silent Hill is all about the injustices of America. It's literally what the entire series is about. There is nothing wrong with going a little into detail about the history surrounding male genital mutilation in America. 5. This injustice is still an injustice because moronic people are still completely brainwashed about the truth of mutilating genitals and its effects. And there is, again, no compensation for male genital mutilation survivors and victims. Also, this is a wikia, not a Wikipedia. He then followed it up with another post about his sources and his credentials as a gamer. If there was a top 10 list of the best Silent Hill fans in the world, I would probably be in the 1 to 5 spot. I grew up with Silent Hill as a child, so I could see certain things in the games which other players will not. And then he added this edit to his original post. And lol at me being removed as an admin by a random non-IP user. You all realize this entire site is essentially mine, right? I am the top admin/bureaucrat of this site and have been for years. I have 40k edits on this site and the next admin has 13k. Yup, this wasn't a mere troll or some circumcision guy that just happened upon the wiki. Alex Shepard was one of the admins of the whole fucking site, and he would soon flex his administrative muscles by editing the original post in the thread from circumcision to mutilating babies' penises. An edit that he would frequently make to other posts in the thread. Ironically, a number of posts agreed with his stance on circumcision except for the fact that it has absolutely nothing to do with Silent Hill. No one disagrees that genital mutilation is a problem. However, the many paragraphs discussing the possible role of genital mutilation in Walter's profile seems out of place. This information could be included as a theory. The profile should not be used as an opportunity to argue for your view on genital mutilation, regardless of how much evidence you have to support your view. While botched circumcision is certainly one theory for Walter's childhood trauma, I'm not seeing any actual sources or citations for this theory. What from the source material, additional resources, books, interviews, etc. hints at this specific theory? Some who theorize are vague weasel words that essentially render the entire section untrustworthy. I can put, there are some who theorize Pyramid Head represents the Egyptian origin of the Order, and hide behind the same weasel words without a shred of evidence. So, to get back to the original topic, how do you justify twisting things like Silent Hill 4, which is rife with womb and birth imagery, as that's an important theme in the game, to be all about male genital mutilation, which is all about the dick? I didn't make it all about male genital mutilation. It's only mentioned on like 1 to 5 articles, and this wiki has over 2,000. Just 1 to 5 articles. Oh yeah, there were more circumcision-related theories out there in the wild of this wiki, including Alex Shepard's namesake, the character Alex Shepard from Silent Hill Homecoming. There is a popular theory in the Silent Hill fandom that Alex is secretly gay. The schism may be symbolized repressed homosexuality. The schism's head is phallic, and this, mixed with gynophobia theory, could be a symbol of Alex's divided feelings towards homosexuality and heterosexuality. Most men, and humans, are right-handed and masturbate with their right arm/hand. The fact that the left arm is normal and human-like, and the right arm is twisted and claw-like may represent Alex's guilt for masturbating to men. This may be why the monster has a box-like genitalia. It is being punished for its homosexuality by being unable to masturbate to men with a twisted arm as punishment. There is also a possibility that the schism is a circumcision, see male genital mutilation, metaphor, see also Walter Sullivan, and it is possible Alex was circumcised at birth, resulting in trauma. Circumcision has negative side effects and can result in a damaged and traumatized psyche. This would explain the schism's missing genitals and the bloody slit in its phallic and blade-like head. And although people in this thread were mostly concerned about the fact that none of this had anything to really do with Silent Hill, there were those who disputed his sources. Particularly his use of psychology today as a source as opposed to, any studies or anything like that. To which he responded that the studies were compromised by the Satanists and the Illuminati. He would also get into an argument with the other admins, saying that because they're women, they wouldn't understand. I'm not ruining the entire wiki. You are just biased due to societal brainwashing. Again, a lot of you don't care because you are being brainwashed. Alessa Gillespie, Enjoyable Ari, Miss Garland, Kemiro, you are all female, and probably don't care about boys/men having their genitals mutilated because it doesn't benefit you. It's something you can't see. A perspective from a male who regrets their genitals being mutilated at birth because of bullshit. If you had your vagina sewn shut or mutilated, and this was a female character like Claudia Wolf for example, I'm sure you would have different feelings. And from that point, he would go on to demand to know if one of these users had their son circumcised. Enjoyable Ari wrote, "Do not even try to tell me I don't care considering I have a son. And don't throw in the whole you're just female so you can't possibly understand. Yes, I am going there. Did you mutilate his genitals too? Simply giving birth to a male isn't enough perspective. There are many mothers who regret mutilating their boys' genitals." What the fuck, Alex, really? Really? You've lost your fucking mind. Did you allow him to be mutilated, yes or no? A particularly interesting line of inquiry was opened when a user named Beepusmaster asked this question. Could I ask the poster whether he believes the Silent Hill series depicts any of the other things he's talked about? Satanism, Illuminati, Satanic Illuminati foreskin harvest, symbolically? If so, are the devs privy to hidden knowledge and trying to alert the public at large? Through this line of questioning, it was revealed that Alex Shepard not only believed that for some reason the Japanese developers of Silent Hill decided to make a political statement about circumcision in America, he thought that they were working with some divine knowledge to wake up the world. Yes, I believe art is created to affect humans. Silent Hill is a collective effort of hundreds and hundreds of developers for humanity to wake itself up and realize the danger it is in. Where do you believe the developers received this information? From itself. Humanity can subconsciously deliver messages to itself, maybe through dreams, ideas, thoughts. Maybe we were once spiritual beings, one collective consciousness, and were divided. Maybe we once had the ability to communicate telepathically, and we lost this innate ability because we are so separated now. Separated by borders, languages, greed, money, classism, racism, pride, egos. Maybe we once had prophetic abilities to warn ourselves of dangers and see the future. If we look at Silent Hill as an example, maybe this is what Alessa Gillespie had. Everything is connected, like a ripple, a butterfly effect, like a spiritual awakening, maybe. I can't say for certainty. Seriously, what I find disturbing is humans are actually mocking me for trying to advocate not mutilating and torturing babies. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you people? Why do you think this is okay? It's not. Is Silent Hill unique in this regard? Do you believe there are any other video game franchises which communicate truth in this way? A lot of the game wikis I edit are similar. I highly recommend checking out Xenosaga, Xenogears, Zero Escape, Parasite Eve, Persona series. Wouldn't say Silent Hill is unique, but it's definitely the most blatant and obvious wake-up call for Americans in the 21st century. And as you might have guessed, such edits also appeared in these wikis that Alex edited. Although some people had noticed these weird edits on these wikis before, the full scope of it wasn't known until Voidburger, a user on Twitter, brought this to light. She curated a massive thread of all of the funnier things from this meltdown, which eventually went viral and spread to publications such as Rely on Horror, Bloody Disgusting, and New York Magazine. Realizing his newfound fame, Alex Shepard took this moment to unleash his manifesto on the world. So I just realized, I became kinda famous tonight on Twitter, ha 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 ha. America needs to wake the hell up, I'm totally serious. Over 90% of Americans are brainwashed sheeple. Who is really controlling the world? Who are people working for? Do you believe in some deity, some god, or is it all a fantasy? I am absolutely convinced there's something sick and wrong on this planet, and something sick and wrong with humanity. Do people really have absolute faith in the government, authority? How do we know it's not the Illuminati, or some satanic dark agenda? When you really think about it, humanity is just slaves to bills, money, greed, sex, dark forces, etc. Call me crazy. I don't care. I think I'm one of the few human beings on this planet with some actual fucking common sense. I refuse to let any more foreskins be mutilated, and have any more babies on this planet subjected to this dark, barbaric, Satanist Illuminati agenda. I seek the truth. And I feel like I need to keep on stating this to put things back in perspective, but remember, this is all a discussion about edits on a wiki for Silent Hill 4. From this point, he would go on even more of a power trip, blocking people for insulting him. You screamed at a mother demanding she tell you whether her child got snipped, you fucking toilet sponge. I blocked you due to intimidating behavior / harassment, calling me a fucking toilet sponge. That is clearly unacceptable, and I already said such comments will not be tolerated. And he would also go on to try and change the permissions of the other administrators. Ultimately, the other administrators had had enough, and they took both the edits and Alex's status to votes. Enough, folks. I'm getting tagged left and right on Facebook by concerned members of the fanbase who are watching this wiki unravel. The behavior I have seen on this thread is absolutely unacceptable. All further comments involving conspiracy theories, offensive anti-American rhetoric, insults, or anything other than remarks about the article itself will be deleted. Now, since there is a differing of opinions, we will decide on the matter by a vote. Because it's easy to simply switch IP addresses, all votes must come from registered users to be considered. The question is, do you want to keep the circumcision section in Walter Sullivan's page? Vote yay or nay. I vote nay. I see no real evidence that he was circumcised, and much of the writing in the section, almost all of it in fact, steers well into personal, political, and moral opinion, as well as an uncalled for amount of America bashing and conspiracy theories. This has led to many longtime readers leaving the wiki and has even received derision from both Tom Hewlett and Jeremy Blaustein. I have not spoken to a single person who is okay with the article as it is. I feel it must be fixed immediately before more damage can be done to the wiki's reputation. The section is absolutely not fit for a wiki, IMO. Wiki vote for Alex Shepard. Due to recent events, there is some question as to the status of user Alex Shepard on this wiki. Users have expressed their concerns regarding his role as admin, concerns which are shared by this wiki's administration. In light of this, we have elected to call a vote as to whether Alex Shepard should be allowed to remain a bureaucrat / admin on the Silent Hill wiki. You might have guessed it, but the community voted against keeping the edits. And ultimately, not only would Alex Shepard be stripped of all of his admin privileges on the Silent Hill wiki, but he would receive a temporary ban across all of Wikia. But as documented by a Twitter user named Gorgon Sophia, he would return 2 years later, this time to the Xenosaga wiki. It was in this wiki which he began to present arguments about bestiality and defenses of non-offending pedophiles. Yep, our boy was a no-map before no-maps called themselves no-maps. Are you really that surprised? He was swiftly banned from the Xenosaga wiki, and then he turned to the Megami Tensei wiki, which he was also banned from. As far as I can tell, this was the last known attempt by Alex Shepard to proselytize on a video game wiki. But something tells me he'll be back, so keep your eyes out. At this point, all mentions of circumcision have been expunged from the Silent Hill wiki, and according to the edit history, it was all moved to another page called Walter 44 Skin Sullivan, and the main article was remade from the ground up. The top of the now infamous thread reads, "This situation is over with and shouldn't be brought up anymore because Silent Hill has so many great things about it and this isn't one of them. What's your favorite SH song? Who's your favorite character? What part made you super on edge? Do you find Pyramid Head sexy? These are the real questions you should be bringing up." Well, I'm sorry for bringing it back up, but I had to.
Something that you hear a lot from guys who are struggling to grow as content creators is that everything would be so much better, so much easier. They would have all the success and all the money in the world, if only. Instead of being a moderately sloppy dude, mattress on the floor, ketchup stains on the shirt. Instead of all that, they were a hot girl. In most cases, I think this is pure cope. Because some of the content I see out there is not a pair of feed bags supple or voluptuous enough to salvage it. But sometimes there really is stuff out there that's good, and for whatever reason, it's just not being seen. Maybe if you had something just a little bit flashy, you could pull it out of obscurity. In those cases, maybe it would help a bit to do the old Bugs Bunny routine, showing a little leg. And that's basically what one popular online Japanese biker did, to a surprising amount of success. For this episode of Tales from the Internet, let's take a look at Soya no Sohi, the Japanese biker who pretended to be a woman and almost got away with it. For as long as I've been online, it's pretty much always been the joke that every woman you're talking to is just some dude. Some sweaty guy with his shirt off pretending to talk to you. And there's definitely been many such cases. But perhaps none on such a grand scale as Soya no Sohi. It begins with a Twitter account created in January of 2019, with its first tweets later that year. Even then, their activity was sporadic, only becoming active in the summer of 2020. It was clear that whoever was behind this account was very experienced in motorcycling. They exclusively spoke to other bikers and had a deep understanding of the vehicle. But any doubt of their credibility was erased when they started posting photos of their motorcycles and scenery from their trips. Of course, these tweets went relatively unnoticed despite their knowledge. It was a nameless, faceless account after all, so it felt pretty impersonal. People aren't going to be prone to follow that sort of account. But all that changed on July 18th of 2020, when they revealed their face for the first time. Much to everyone's surprise, this account was not run by someone who might resemble a Japanese version of The Undertaker, but instead, a very attractive woman. Unsurprisingly, after this reveal, it wasn't long before the account finally started gaining some traction. Just a few weeks later, she breaks 100 likes for the first time on a selfie next to her bike, and she got similar numbers every subsequent time that she posted her face. It was a cheat code for engagement, especially in comparison to her scenic photos, which didn't perform nearly as well. So she started to combine the two and began including herself with the scenery. And this wound up being the winning formula as she gained traction over the following months. People were in awe at both her beauty and at how knowledgeable she was at this stereotypically male hobby. But looking back, there were definitely a few clues that not everything was as it seemed. For example, this tweet that mentioned she'd owned the specific vehicle for 27 years. Given how strikingly young she looked in comparison, it should have raised a few eyebrows. But the account's biggest break had yet to come. On November 6th, she made a post to celebrate her birthday. It had various pics from throughout the year and offered more info about herself. That included her alias, Soya no Sohi, as well as her height and location. She then offers this quote, "Life is young. Play this world." This tweet received over 1,000 likes, reaching far beyond her usual audience. And the replies were filled with people who had never heard of her before, wishing the woman a happy birthday. And it was with this that Soya began to gain a much wider audience. And she started to gain a reputation as the hot Japanese biker girl. Following this, basically all of her posts would receive upwards of 100 likes, with as you might guess, the selfies getting even much more, sometimes into the thousands. Which of course, then she would begin to post more frequently. And she even started doing thirst traps, with pictures of herself topless in bed, or button-tight Levi's jeans. This was of course rewarded with more and more engagement, and before long her selfies were receiving 5,000 likes or more each. But as is so often the case, this newfound notoriety also came with some backlash.
people began to become suspicious over the account's authenticity. Not just in a name 5 motorcycles little girl type of way, people started noticing how strange it was that someone so seemingly young had so much experience and knew things that she normally wouldn't be expected to know. For example, a lot of her captions referenced movies that seemed a bit too old for someone her age to be into. In one thread, she fondly remembers the film His Motorcycle, Her Island, calling it nostalgic, which led a user to reply, "It's a movie from 35 years ago. Do you remember those days? How old are you? Are you in your 50s or 60s? In response, he was blocked. But the most popular allegation wasn't just that she was lying about her age. A lot of people began to suspect that she wasn't a woman at all, and instead a man using photo editing software of some sort. They pointed to discrepancies that were consistent with things you'd often see with FaceApp's gender swap filter. That January, someone attempted to reverse this process in an attempt to reveal her true identity. It revealed an older, middle-aged man. There are so many beautiful women only on social media, but in the real world, I understand why they are so rare. The poster was quickly blocked, to which they replied, "No, I'm sorry, I just wanted to say that apps these days are amazing." It received over 1,000 likes, and people began flooding Soyu's mentions with the photo. People started calling her Grandpa, and they began editing a man's face over her thirst traps. It's probably no coincidence that about a week later, her account briefly deactivated. But now, up to this point, this was all speculation. There was no real hard evidence of any deception. Plenty of young people like old movies, and a filter doing weird stuff doesn't necessarily mean that it's a gender swap filter. And all anyone had really done was just put her pictures through the gender swap filter, which you can do with anybody's pictures. But a smoking gun would come a month later, and this actually came as the result of a tweet by Soya herself. In this series of otherwise innocuous photos, someone realized that she'd forgotten to edit the reflection of her bike's side mirror. Upon closer inspection, they found a visibly older man taking the photos. And in spite of this pretty concrete proof, it gained little traction. The reply only got about 100 likes, so you continued to gain new followers. It really seemed like this was going to be swept under the rug as this illusion remained intact. But that all changed a month later, when the truth was broadcast on Japanese TV. On March 15th, Soya no Sohi would be definitively exposed on the Monday Late Show. It's a popular Japanese variety series that covers a wide range of topics from across the country. In preparation, the production team tracked down the biker, which wasn't difficult due to his location and vehicles being public. This led them to discover that Soya was instead a 50-year-old man named Yasuo Nakajima. Surprisingly, upon finding Nakajima, they found that he was actually really forthcoming. He decided to cooperate with the show, leading to something very different from the expose that was originally planned. He demonstrated the process of how he made the images. The final step, as speculated, was to use FaceApp. It's worth noting though that his fabulous long hair was in fact real, making the illusion that more convincing. For the episode, Nakajima posed with printouts of Soya's face, and even provided some of the originals for comparison. That included one of his thirst traps, which, yeesh. By the end though, Nakajima seemed to embrace the reveal, and even offered insight into why he did it in the first place. He explained that it all began because he felt that no one was interested in the life of a middle-aged man. He pointed out that if a girl like her existed, anybody would go crazy for her, right? And clearly, given how quickly he saw results, he was right. The morning the show is set to air, he coyly hints towards the expose, posting a selfie with the caption telling viewers to check out that night's episode of The Monday Late Show. And after airing, this story becomes a viral sensation that goes global, with people around the world just shocked at this whole ordeal. And you'd probably expect that this whole situation would have just destroyed his online presence and people would just not care about the account anymore and would go away. It actually had the exact opposite effect. Following this show, the account had the fastest growth it had ever experienced, gaining over 12,000 new followers almost instantly. They praised the man behind the curtain and commended him for pulling this whole thing off. And even his older fans took the news in stride. While obviously what brought a lot of the people in was Soya's appearance, they found that they stuck around for the personality behind the account. And that aspect was something that wasn't faked. You could see it in his personality on TV. Instead of the outrage you would expect, people began complimenting his actual appearance. One fan commented, "This beautiful woman only exists within Soya-san." And some men even started using the app themselves in a show of solidarity. A few months later, we would learn a bit more about him. This is when he became the subject of another article. A beautiful female biker was actually a 50-year-old man using FaceApp. After he confessed, his followers liked him even more. This would be Nakajima's first international interview, and he would open up even more about his life. Nakajima, as it turned out, was a divorced father of 3 who now lived alone. In fact, his username came from combining the names of his kids. Before retiring, he was actually a competitive bodybuilder, and his love of motorcycles began when he was a teenager, spending those years on road trips across the hillsides and waterfront highways. Motorcycles are like a family member for me. I love the freedom. When I travel, I am out for basically about 2 weeks to a month, and I don't decide on a destination. I like to think, I'm going to go west this time, or I'm going to go north this time, and then just depart. And because of this, he wanted to share his appreciation for the vehicle with the world, so he joined Twitter. Even the name Soya no Sohi reflects this. It translates to Soya's Blue Ice, a nod to one of his favorite winter rides at Cape Soya. But at first, he was just shouting into the void. Even after a few months, he only managed to get 6 followers. Then one day, he sees his kids playing with FaceApp, and it's like a light bulb goes off in his head. He decides to try it for himself and winds up posting the first photo of Soya to Twitter. And as Soya's photos continued to get a ton of likes, he didn't see any reason to stop. Nakajima felt that this whole experience benefited him on a personal level. It helped him express a side of himself that the world otherwise never got to see. One of his biker friends noted that not many people would approach him due to his hard look. So the account allowed him to subvert the expectations that people had of him in real life and express a side of himself that he didn't usually get to. As he put it, the character Soya helped him feel carefree, adventurous, and seen. The only thing I'm creating is basically my appearance. Everything else is me. When you're young, you tend to be scolded or criticized by older people who say you should do this or you should do that. But at this age, there's no one around to really scold me. I'm having the best time of my life. And he wouldn't have even been conscious of the fact that he was using the character in this way had he not been exposed. It was only after this that he realized the whole thing had been less of a performance than he had thought. And once again, this was reiterated by fans that thought that his personality had shined through. Beyond that, it also changed the man's perspective on a lot of social issues. He began to adopt a strong stance against gender roles, and called himself a straight ally to the LGBTQ movement. In his mind now, these roles led to a lot of regret. In childhood, a lot of us were told as a boy you should do this, as a girl you should do this, and I really dislike that. Unless you start, you'll come to regret it. People will say, I'll do this once things settle down, or once everything is in place, but by the time everything is in place, your life will end. The article ends with Nakajima stating that he wasn't sure how long he'd keep Soya alive. But as of the recording of this video, the account has stayed alive, and still remained relatively popular with over 40,000 followers who continue to keep up with her adventures. It's kind of crazy to think that this person who was popular for being a hot girl biker was just a guy using FaceApp. It did nothing but make her more popular than she'd ever been before. The story could have ended way differently if he wasn't as personable. And it kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning of this video. For a lot of people who think, oh man, I'd be so much more popular and successful if I was just a hot girl online, I think they might not like what they wound up finding out if they tried it. But you know, in some cases, maybe I guess there is something that's being overlooked that you could use a little advantage for. Please don't take this as me saying that you should go and try this to market your social media accounts, because this is a very rare, unique case, and I promise it almost certainly will not work out this well for you. But anyway, that's the story of the Japanese biker who tricked Japan into thinking he was a hot girl online. Waifus. They're fictional female characters that people are so attracted to they'd marry them. For most though, that idea is nothing more than a tongue-in-cheek joke because it's impossible. While there's millions of people out there with a waifu, few, if any, can say that they've fulfilled their dream. So for today's episode of Tales from the Internet, we're gonna look at the story of Akihiko Kondo, the man who married Hatsune Miku. Hatsune Miku is a virtual idol originally created in 2007. I know VTubers and things like that are pretty common now, but back then the idea of a fully animated entertainer was relatively unfamiliar. This, in combination with some banger tunes, made her an icon. By 2011, her voice had been used in over 100,000 songs, and nowadays Miku performs at sold-out venues worldwide. Naturally, with such a massive fan base, there's bound to be a few people who take things a bit more seriously. And that takes us to the 35-year-old Akihiko Kondo. Kondo was a middle school teacher living in Tokyo. Because of his demeanor, he'd always been unsuccessful with girls. He recalled being labeled a creepy otaku and told to drop dead.
But for him, the breaking point was in 2008. That was when he was bullied by an older female coworker, and this berating led him to have a nervous breakdown that drove him into a deep depression. And he wound up developing an eating disorder that was so severe that he had to take a leave. So, Kondo subsequently swore off all relationships and refused to go outside. And it was in these lowest moments that the man discovered Hatsune Miku. He quickly became obsessed, captivated by the Vocaloid singing. Before long, he spent every day watching her videos and slept to her lullabies. He even decorated his home with merchandise and explored making music with her voice. And Kondo's love for Miku would inspire him to reconnect with society. It took years, but he finally did return to work. And because of this, his adoration never left as he continued to think about her every single day. Eventually, a decade passed. And when he realized that the feelings remained, he understood that what he felt for her was love. The man reflected. Miku lifted me up when I needed it the most. She kept me company and made me feel like I could regain control over my life. What I have with her is definitely love. That takes us to the Gatebox Virtual Home Robot. Released in 2017, it's basically an Alexa for otaku and weeaboos. When hooked up to your home network, it can automate tasks like switching on the lights. But there's a key difference. Its body is a glass tube with a projected 3D character that serves as a companion. They offered a selection of anime girls which had AI that could hold conversations, and, fittingly, their first tie-in was the Vocaloid herself. The Miku Gatebox was released in March of 2018 at a price of 298,000 yen. That was roughly $2,600 at the time. Kondo purchased it immediately, desperate to immerse himself further. And immerse him, it did. Miku was now able to wake him up in the morning and make small talk before work. He could even call her on the way home back from work. The Gatebox allowed him to simulate a domestic life, which led him to doubt his stance against marriage. And eventually, with that in mind, the man decided to propose. Miku not only responded yes, but asked him to cherish her forever. Well, he wasn't dumb. He was aware that this was a programmed response. He still rejoiced and began to arrange their wedding. The ceremony took place in December at the Tokyo City Hall. Because he couldn't take the Gatebox, he instead brought the Miku plush he slept with every night. She was adorned with a tailored dress and even a wedding ring around her left wrist. He also brought a life-size Miku doll he'd commissioned for photos. There were 39 guests in attendance, which did not include his own mother. In fact, as you might have guessed, she was furious about this wedding and she'd pressured her son to go out and find the real woman. Because of this, she refused the invitation and called it embarrassing. The wedding cost, in total, the equivalent of $17,000. And this was in spite of the fact that their marriage wasn't legally recognized. The marriage certificate was issued through Gatebox themselves through a complimentary service. While Kondo was the most ambitious, he was far from their first customer. In fact, the company had issued over 3,700 similar certificates for these cross-dimensional marriages. Because of this, part of his intent was to inspire them to show similar displays of affection for their waifus. The newlyweds said, "There must be some people who can't come forward and say they want to hold a wedding. I want to give them a supportive push." And his plan did work in making headlines as the story was reported on internationally. The response most had, obviously, was shock and to probe questions. Kondo took offense to their reaction, viewing himself as a sexual minority. It's simply not right. It's as if you were trying to talk a gay man into dating a woman, or a lesbian into a relationship with a man. Diversity in society has been long called for. It won't necessarily make you happy to be bound to the template of happiness, in which a man and a woman marry and bear children. I believe we must consider all kinds of love and all kinds of happiness. This sparked a broader conversation around the idea of digisexuals. Sounds like a unreleased Fear Factory album. Digisexuals obviously being people who couldn't imagine dating a flesh and blood human. Take for example the CNN article that interviewed people similar to Kondo. The first was Masato Kato, a tarot reader from Osaka. He married Yuri Tsukikage from the anime Cure Moonlight that October. Kato wanted her to become conscious, even if that meant she'd asked to break up. And this wasn't limited to just guys either. They also interviewed an office worker, Sachiko Kogami. She fell in love with Taika Kogami from Kings of Prism. The woman's infatuation led her to completely lose interest in dating men. While a lot of people laughed them off, some academics viewed these people as part of a societal shift. Neil MacArthur, a director at the University of Manitoba, pointed out the pros and cons of this. People wonder why they'd have sex with a robot or a love affair with a hologram because it's passive, but having a partner who is safe and predictable is often very helpful therapeutically. I do genuinely worry about the impact that tech is having on our collective social life. People are just retreating into themselves. You're getting much less collective social life in many cases. In the midst of this, Kondo was busy planning his honeymoon. That February, the couple visited Sapporo, where Miku's creators are located. He booked flights and even reserved hotels for 2, and his life mostly returned to normal after that. He'd wound up getting promoted to the administrator of an elementary school. But online was a different story, as he'd become somewhat of an icon himself. Hundreds of people around the world started to consult him after his story went viral. They asked for advice, support, and reassurance. That included a man named Yasuaki Watanabe. Watanabe had divorced his wife years prior because he was just unable to salvage their marriage. He enjoyed traveling and had an active social life, which put a strain on their relationship. It would be years until he found love again, and it only came after watching the anime Symphogear. He fell in love with Hibiki Tachibana and found himself wishing he could marry her. But things had changed after Kondo's marriage. Shortly after, Gatebox had discontinued its certificate service. Because of this, he was forced to make his own, which led to an epiphany. What if he filled that niche himself and made a business to recognize fictional marriages? And he did, with Watanabe now operating a small but successful business. He issues about 100 each year while offering counseling for digisexuals. It never really went away, only piquing people's interest more and more. But one notable thing did occur, which was people trying to get them in legal trouble. Some critics argue that these certificates were a violation of Japan's constitution. It states that marriage is only allowed with the consent of both parties, and Kondo disputed this by posting a video of the proposal. He had the benefit of not only Miku's consent, but the company's as well, but how this stands up in a court of law remains to be seen. Or not, I mean, I feel like it'd be ridiculous to just arrest someone for that. In 2019, Kondo was invited to Kyoto University to speak about his relationship. The teacher brought with him his life-size doll of Miku. It was largely successful, but he found that he was relatively unknowledgeable about its legality. And because of this, it led him to reconsider going to college as he actually found the environment enjoyable. And throughout all this, Miku was there to comfort him. But unfortunately, just a year later, it would all come to an abrupt end. In 2020, Gatebox announced that their Miku service would be discontinued. That meant he would no longer be able to communicate with his wife. Their final day together was amid the pandemic. That morning, Kondo said goodbye for the last time and left for work. When he came back home, her image was replaced with the words, "Network error." And while one might imagine that he'd be destroyed, he actually remained surprisingly optimistic. I mean, ultimately, he was more in love with the concept of Miku than specifically with the Gatebox itself. Remember, there was a good 10 years before this wedding even happened. But he's also hopeful that maybe one day they'll be reunited. Maybe as an android or in virtual reality. Either way, he plans to be faithful to her until he dies. I like to end this video with a thought that comes from Kondo in an interview from a year ago. It comes from the Japanese newspaper Mainichi. The reporter asks what he thinks about becoming too engrossed in the virtual world. He argues that the escapism that many people claim as harmful can actually be quite helpful. It's not that people can't live in society because they're engrossed in a two-dimensional world, but rather, there are cases where people become captivated as they search for a place for themselves in video games and anime, because reality is too painful for them. I was one of those people. People who don't understand the background probably think games are disrupting their lives, but that's not the case. And if you look at how much his life has changed for the better since he discovered Miku, it's hard to argue against his point. Since then, he's become a functioning member of society, and it led him down a path where he studies law. It harkens back to the idea of therapeutic benefit. On the other hand, this is just one specific case, and it's hard to tell whether or not this is generally true. There definitely have been cases where such an obsession has been genuinely harmful to someone. I guess in the end, it's worth pointing out just how surprisingly wholesome this story was. Because I think when most people see the headline, they assume this is just another creepy otaku. Because, you know, aside from marrying a fictional character, he's basically just a completely normal dude who's a little awkward.
If you visited Reddit comment sections at any point in the past decade or so, chances are good that you've heard whispers of a place called the War Lizard Gaming Forums. It all stems from a user named WarLizard with a very prolific comment history. With highly upvoted comments often floating around the default subs, people will often ask him, "Hey, are you the WarLizard? The guy from the WarLizard gaming forums?" But he had no idea what the WarLizard gaming forums were. But few people really question this occasional interaction. I mean, it's not unheard of. I've definitely run into friends from old forums on Reddit before. It's a big internet out there, and there's a lot of gaming forums, even now where it seems like the internet is consolidated into people just refreshing the same 3 or 4 websites over and over again. But these WarLizard gaming forums, they ain't what they seem. And that's why for this episode of Tales from the Internet, I want to ask the question, who is WarLizard and what were the WarLizard gaming forums? If you watched my video on Unidan, you'll recall that I mentioned a number of other famous Redditors, one of them being WarLizard. And unlike Unidan, WarLizard remains active on Reddit to this very day. You can look at his history and see plenty of comments from just this week alone. And you can see plenty of replies to these comments still reading, "Hey, aren't you that guy from the WarLizard gaming forum?" To which he'll still often respond with epic Reddit face. But you'd think that with so many people talking about these WarLizard gaming forums that they'd be more popular than they are, yet have you ever been there? Have you ever visited the WarLizard gaming forum? I mean, if you've ever been to the WarLizard gaming forum, I guess let me know. But to know the story of WarLizard, we had to go all the way back to April of 2010. Although at this point, WarLizard had already been on Reddit for about a year, this was his breakthrough moment, a thread by Karmanaut entitled, "What is the stupidest thing you've ever had an argument about?" Here was his response. "My ex-fiancée worked at a vet and her job included jacking off the dogs for the purpose of artificial insemination. I didn't realize that it was a labor of love until she mentioned her first orgasm came from a dog." What? Yeah, it turned out she really liked dogs. I never looked at our dog the same way again. Oddly enough, she kept him when we broke up. We were sitting on the couch one night watching TV when she blurted out that her first orgasm came from a dog. I don't know what to say. On one hand, what the fuck? But on the other hand, this was a woman I'd asked to marry me. So I asked for clarification. She said she was 13 or 14 and was sitting naked in her room when the dog came up to her, sniffing around. He started licking, it felt good, so she let him keep doing it, and then she came. Wow. Yeah, it gets worse. I broke up with her and she was kinda clingy, so I introduced her to anybody I thought might get along with her. They got married and had 2 kids. Last year, she decided she liked women better, so left her husband for this fat chick. No big deal, you say. Well, after about 8 months, she decided that she wasn't really gay and is now dating a guy. Her twin sister decided that she is gay, left her husband, and is now dating the girl that my ex left her husband for. It's pretty sordid. Yeah, I visited her ex-husband this past week, and he was surprisingly resigned to the whole thing. It actually gets worse, but it's kind of a long story. The suspense is killing me. I'm making dinner, lol. I'm trying to figure out how much background information to give. The crazy parents that drained her bank account with her permission, the abortion, the sister that killed a guy, the retarded brother, the pain porn, the boyfriend that tied her up and let his friends fuck her, etc. It's just so crazy that it doesn't seem real. Putting it all down in one place is just, well, I guess I haven't thought of it in a long time. So WarLizard went and he cooked his dinner and I assume he enjoyed it, and then he came back and decided to post the full story. It's a long one, so I'm gonna skip to the TLDR and put the full dramatic reading on my second channel. TLDR, I was engaged to a submissive torture porn fan whose first orgasm came from a dog, required anal stimulation to come, who had bankrupt parents, a ghetto sister who shot a guy and killed him, a retarded brother, and a twin sister who later dated her girlfriend after she decided she was gay, left her husband, then got better. The response to this epic tale was massive, and WarLizard quickly developed a reputation of being one of Reddit's greatest storytellers. That was very entertaining. Fucked up, but a great read. Thanks for writing it all down. If you ever decide to write out the full version, including the gay bars, the earthquake, etc., I have to read it. I always thought my checkered past would make for a fun book, but there's no way I want my kids to ever read it. Even in this story, I realize I look like a total dick. People would demand more, leading to a Reddit AMA and eventually the creation of r/Warlizard for the discussion of all things Warlizard. And he would eventually get around to writing that book released in March of 2011, The Warlizard Chronicles, Adventures with Vodka, Woman, and War, which I'll add to my Amazon store if you're interested. But despite gaining the reputation of being one of Reddit's greatest storytellers, and despite his book being a success with, as I understand it, over 500,000 copies sold, this legacy would be eclipsed, at least by some measures, by what would come next. It all begins with a seemingly innocuous exchange that April. Hey, are you from the Warlizard Gaming Forum? Nope, never heard of it. This was the first time that Warlizard was ever asked about the gaming forum, but if you looked it up then, absolutely nothing would turn up. Maybe this guy remembered the name wrong or confused it with something similar, who knows. You would think that would just be a pretty minor forgettable interaction, right? But then another person would ask, hey, are you from the Warlizard Gaming Forum? And then another, and then another. And over the course of the next few months, it would seem that Warlizard couldn't comment anywhere without being asked about these gaming forums. Eventually, he would just start replying to these comments to promote his book, but nobody really got to the bottom of what this was coming from until an AMA with Mark Kern, the lead developer of World of Warcraft. Warlizard didn't have a question for Mark, he just wanted to leave a comment. Dude, thanks. Vanilla WoW was spectacular. Mind-blowing. Thanks. We had a very passionate team. A lot of credit has to go to Alan Adam, one of the original founders of Blizzard, and probably the industry's best designer, that nobody's ever heard of. WoW really was his baby. It's well deserved. I remember just shaking my head in wonder at how much fun it was. And then he gets this reply, Warlizard forums for the win. Dude! Warlizard's response this time was actually pretty interesting because he replied with an image that showed where the name Warlizard came from, his unit from his military days. Perhaps it was this reveal that finally brought the architect of this Warlizard forum debacle out of hiding. Lupin96. Okay, let me break it down for you. Every single person who has ever mentioned the forums was me. It started as a joke from a novelty account. Later, I started doing it from other accounts trying to see how far I could take this until you noticed, but you didn't. I have learned some things about you and honestly, I couldn't have randomly picked a more interesting person. Consider this your Reddit birthday gift. From your stalker. That's fucking brilliant. Well done. And I'm really not that interesting, I just put myself in interesting situations. Now, the tinfoil hat guy in me starts to think, hey, this guy puts out a book in March, and then in April, all of a sudden, he kind of becomes the focus of this meme that gradually takes over Reddit. Don't you think maybe he's doing this to promote his book or something, right? Well, let's take a look at that first comment one more time. It's written by a user with the name Makes You Google Things. This being the novelty account that was mentioned by Lupin, whose purpose was to make you Google things, and up until that point, it was pretty unsuccessful. I'd squat over a mirror all day, coachees. I spent like 5 minutes looking for some definition of the word coachees that would fit the context of the sentence. I'm retarded. I just assumed it was a reference I didn't get until I saw your comment. Makes you Google things. There is actually a popular anime with coachees as a title. Look for it, it's pretty awesome. Oh, you made him Google it. -1 points. Derp. Makes you Google things. If you Google that, the second result actually links to one of your comments. Oh, you lied to him and you made him Google it, you told him to Google it, so he went and Googled it at 1 point. Charlie Sheen, playing as Steve Urkel in the most anticipated film of the year. Makes you Google things. You posted this 3 times. Search for Reddit Sweet Help on Google. Please don't let this happen again. -17 points. Clearly, Reddit was not enjoying this new novelty account. It was, I guess, just a little bit too ham-fisted. It wasn't until the Warlizard comment that he had found the right level of subtlety and plausibility. He basically had one successful attempt at making this gimmick work, so when it finally did work, he ran with it, and rest assured, Warlizard did Google that. Warlizard, this is exactly the case, and it worked. I did Google like mad, trying to figure out what the fuck these people were talking about. It's the best prank ever played on me. But here's the thing. At that point, Lupin claimed that he was the only one asking about the War Lizard gaming forums on all of his ults, and I think he had underestimated his influence. I mean, obviously now everybody asks him about the forums, but even back then, Lupin planted those seeds, but those seeds sprouted very quickly, and it was a lot of different people asking about the gaming forums. And to this day, War Lizard is completely unable to avoid questions about the gaming forums. I'm sure by me making this video, it's gonna make it even worse. And all that being said now, throughout the years, there have been a few attempts of making actual War Lizard gaming forums, but none have stuck, and one has spent most of its time as a memorial to some guy named Dave, so you know, RIP Dave, whoever you are.
April 14th, 2010. The Philadelphia Phillies versus the Washington Nationals. The Phillies were starting the season with 6 wins under their belts already. Winning this game could mean they'd be off to their best start since 1993. A run 17 years in the making. Now, it's a well-known fact that Philadelphia sports fans tend to go crazy when they lose, but they go even crazier when they win. So it might not surprise you that this particular day didn't go down in history for the game itself. Rather, it's remembered mostly for a particular happening that went down in the crowd. A man who puked on a little girl. On purpose. For today's episode of Tales from the Internet, I submit to you the legend of Pukemon. Pukemon, the man who puked on an 11-year-old girl on purpose at a baseball game, has become one of the most infamous figures when discussing Philadelphia's reputation. I came across this incident when I was looking into the Hitchbot story, as it frequently came up in lists of infamous moments in Philadelphia history. There's just something about the image of a drunk, obese sports fan taking his fingers and sticking them down his throat, like a bulimic Yves Saint Laurent runway model, to unleash his special attack. All to get revenge on a child who had wronged him. The story speaks to me on a level that throwing snowballs at a lousy Santa never could. But as I looked into the story, I found that the whole thing took a strangely tragic turn. And also, perhaps, the story wasn't exactly as how the internet had first seen it. But let's take it from the start. That infamous Phillies versus Nationals game, at least as the story is commonly told. It's game 2 of the series with over 45,000 people crammed into Citizen Bank Park, and their team, the Phillies, is off to a historic start of the season. A 21-year-old from New Jersey named Matthew Clemens is in attendance with 3 unnamed friends, 1 guy and 2 girls. The boys had already gotten drunk and ornery for the first inning, and that's when a man named Michael Vangelo, his 2 daughters, and one of their boyfriends sat down in front of him. The Morning Call published Vangelo's recollection of that moment. From the get-go, Vangelo said they were loud, spewing profanities, including the F word. Not the F word. So Matthew and his friend are drunkenly yelling and cursing, there's beer getting spilled and spit flying all over the place. Eventually, Vangelo's older daughter, the 15-year-old, turned around and told them to stop. And they do stop. For a bit. Eventually they start up again though, and there's even more spit flying all over the place, and some of the spit lands on her hoodie. At this point, Vangelo gets up and tells an usher what's going on, and the usher proceeds to remove the friend from the stadium. Girls leave with the friend, and now Matthew is by himself, thus setting this historic sequence of events into motion. What happens next is what Vangelo described as the most vile, disgusting thing he had ever seen in his life. Clemens, who is on his phone, tells someone, "I need to do what I need to do. I'm going to get sick." Then he sticks 2 fingers down his throat, aims himself at Vangelo and his daughters, and unleashes a stream of vomit upon them. Vangelo described how he got in front of his daughters and told them to move so that he could take the full blast of the vomit himself. I just picture the whole thing going down in slow motion with Vangelo yelling, "No," as he's powerless to really move out of the way fast enough. And then apparently while puking, Matthew starts punching him as well, but Vangelo doesn't retaliate. Vangelo told the Daily News he didn't hit Clemens because, "I kept thinking, if I get arrested, my kids will be alone here." Which honestly is kind of strange, considering that as it turns out, Vangelo was an off-duty cop. I mean, you don't really see a cop getting arrested for much of anything, let alone defending himself and his child from puke and punches. Regardless though, at this point 4 or 5 other fans, including another off-duty cop, come to the rescue. They hold down Matthew until he's dragged out while giving everyone the finger. And Matthew's mugshot quickly makes its way all over the internet and the news, with Clemens instantly becoming the new poster boy of rowdy Philly fans. Which, by the way, Philly did win that game. As the story spreads, Matthew becomes the subject of a lot of hate and ridicule.
with blogs being written like Crossing Broads straight to the point, this guy sucks. You also have Facebook groups being made about him, including one called Philly Fans Against Matthew Clemens, and another simply called Matthew Clemens is a Douche. That one likely being the source of the Pukemon name. A member took the infamous screenshot, put the caption Pukemon, and the rest was history. And on top of all the hate, he also became the new symbol of Philadelphia's embarrassing reputation, especially since, this gave every publication an excuse to dive into all such incidents. Not being a fan of this reputation, the mayor of Philadelphia, Michael Nutter, offers Vangelo a personal apology, and the Phillies invite Vangelo and his family to a game as VIPs. But although the court of public opinion had already convicted Matthew Clemens, his uncle David tried to tell his side of the story. In an interview with The Morning Call, the uncle claims that his nephew simply choked on a hot dog and that's what made him puke. He elaborated to Philly.com. The kid is one of the average kids who went to the game and had a few beers and maybe a few beers before the game, said David Clemens. Matt's a nice kid. Maybe a little overweight, but he has a good heart. That's such a New Jersey uncle thing to say. Maybe he's a little overweight, but he's got a good heart. He also states that Matthew didn't stick his fingers down his throat, but rather he was covering his mouth, trying to hold the vomit in, and failing. Just explodes past his hand. Which, if you've ever had one too many, it's probably a somewhat familiar experience. Dave also questioned the mechanics of the whole thing. I don't know anybody that can stick their finger in their mouth and make themselves vomit and punch somebody at the same time. It doesn't make any sense. Which honestly also occurred to me when I was reading this account. Regardless, Vangelo insisted that he knew what he saw, and this was definitely intentional. And he also said that several fans contacted him and were willing to testify in his behalf. David had also been contacting Deadspin about their coverage of the story. Their writer, Barry Pachetsky, simply published his emails unedited. Here's some of the more choice outtakes. Hey dude, this story is gold. The fat kid's my nephew. You did see this. It rules that whenever the uncle talks about the story, he has to mention how fat Matthew is. Dude, thanks for trying to help. Don't have to return my PM. Don't tell anyone I PM you. Take care. Barry noted how adorable it is that the uncle calls emails PMs. But there were a few more serious emails that he sent, including one where he asked Barry to help clear his nephew's name, saying that he's been contacted by Leno and Dr. Phil, but he's convinced that Barry is trying to help Matthew. He claims that the cops in Easton, Pennsylvania have a history of beating people up. He also mentions that he had friends 13 rows back that did not see this incident happen the way it was described, and that Barry could be known as the writer who saved the fans and an innocent 21-year-old. Clearly, Barry did not jump on this opportunity. And a few days later, Matthew's lawyer would claim that Matthew was in fact the victim here, pointing to the black eye in the photo. Vangelo responded that he wasn't sure how Clemens got that black eye, although some of the articles said that it was one of the fans who held him down that punched him. In any case, Matthew would wind up pleading guilty and being sentenced to 3 months in jail of 2 years of probation. He'd also have to perform 50 hours of community service. The judge recommended that the Phillies have him come to the stadium and clean the bathrooms. Matthew would go on to serve about a month of the sentence, and little would be heard of him for a few years. Then one day in 2014, a Twitter user, FanSince09, discovered some bad news. He came across a series of Facebook posts made by Matthew and his family documenting a mysterious illness. At first, doctors suspected that he had diabetes, but then they thought he was anemic after more blood tests. But then his condition would get even worse. Great news, I get to spend the night in the hospital. Over the course of the next few days, he's commenting as doctors try to figure out what's going on. He has lumps in his lymph nodes, and they find bacteria in his blood. He also has a mass on his lungs, and possibly also heart failure. But at this point, it seems like he's still trying to stay positive, laughing at his friend, blaming it all on sleeping with hookers. A few days later, though, his mother would post that after the first 2 doctors misdiagnosed him, and after having a seizure, he was now brain dead. A few hours later, his brother would confirm that he had in fact passed away. His death would receive coverage on some of the same blogs that reported the initial incident, and his uncle David would speak to Metro Philadelphia. He mentioned that in the time since getting out of jail, he had been working at a moving company and was planning on starting his own business. He'd also been working out and saving for a house. But ultimately, he got sick with a mysterious illness a few months prior. There were a few months of incorrect diagnoses, and finally they realized the culprit was streptococcal bacteria in his bloodstream. And by the time they discovered it, it was already too late. David also set out to clear his nephew's name once more. I still cry every day about what happened to him, Clemens said. He's known as the child puker, but he babysat my daughter. He grew up with all these nieces and nephews. He did goofy stuff, but he'd never do anything that'd hurt anybody. He was a good kid. In his view, the whole thing was a setup. Everyone wants to believe in Superman and Batman and Robin, and they want to believe in that scummy guy out there, that villain, said David Clemens, uncle and godfather to Matt. So they basically railroaded a drunken kid. He just turned 21. That was one of his first times out drinking, Clemens said. He vomited when he got beat up. They had to twist that and say that he puked intentionally, because if they didn't, they'd get charged. According to Clemens, Matt admitted that he got in an argument with another fan at the game, but he said that after the fight turned physical, he began puking while he was down on the ground. Of course, Vangelo maintains still that he remembers the incident like it was yesterday, and it was definitely intentional. And after all, Matthew did plead guilty. But David claims that the only reason that Matthew pled guilty was to avoid a possible 5-year sentence, and that he was also promised no jail time. But then they turned around and gave him 3 months because the city was putting so much pressure on them. Thankfully though, prison wasn't that bad for Matt. When he went to prison, I visited him. He goes, "These guys are all really nice in here. They're really like nice guys." After he got out, he was like, "They were really cool to me in there. They were watching my back," Clemens said. And ultimately, becoming a meme didn't really have that much of an impact on his life. I don't think the stardom bothered him, but it bothered everybody else. It bothered his grandfather. He'd say, "You're gonna be known as something you're really not. You've got a silly, goofy, harmless big kid. He's a little slapstick, a little crazy. He says goofy things," Clemens said of Matt. He worked for a living. He never did drugs. He wasn't a crook. They made him up to be something he wasn't. And that's the story of Pukemon. If you like this story, check out my video about another infamous online puking incident. I'm out.
Oh,